Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
As we are able.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
No. Or yes. Or
Yes and no.
Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? No, that's, no, no, not yet. We're gonna let it go through. Motion, can I have a second? Discussion. Are there any questions about how I was gonna move things around on the agenda? Everybody's good with that? So be it. All those in favor of the amended agenda with the changes as communicated earlier in an email, which has been communicated already to the executive assistant and the clerk, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those against? Thank you. Agenda's approved. That being said, we will be moving right on to number 4, which is the audit update. Nate?
All right, so I'm going to call our auditor, Ron Smith here, hopefully.
And if you have the item, it's on the agenda. If you want to look at it, bring it up. Might go right through it with you.
Let me just get the connection here and then we'll do a short,
Oh, you good? Okay, I didn't see it. I apologize.
Is this
Hi,
yours?
Ron, it's David. You can hardly hear me? So we got you set up on a Bluetooth speaker, so let's just do a quick little sound check. Like, Kathy, you want to say something?
Hello, Ron.
Hello, I hear you, it's just,
We'll have to translate.
well, I hear you though.
We'll have to translate, Nate, you'll have
So
to.
we'll repeat as questions come up, just to make sure that Ron, we can all hear you.
Nate, I can hear you well.
Right, okay, I'm standing right on top of you. So we'll repeat the questions for you, Ron, but everyone here can hear you pretty clearly.
There's a chair right there, Nate. You wanna just-
Yeah. You just- Okay, so we have on the phone Ron Smith, who's our district auditor, and we sent out earlier today, and it is posted online, a draft, whoops, I guess I've skewed it here, but this is some draft statements. This is not, as I mentioned in the email, a complete audit. These are just some draft statements for people to see. I wanted to just, by way of kind of introducing the topic, give folks the quick history lesson, which is dating back probably 4 or so years now, just prior to when I started. The school district didn't have an independent audit from the city, and one of the things that the Agency of Education said we needed to do was be audited as a discrete entity. And so we went through a process, RFP process. We hired RHR Smith to be our district auditor. That firm does a lot of other audits throughout Vermont. And they've been with us for, this is, I believe, our 4th year with them. And so you'll see, I think, in the financials that we have made some important progress in some areas, and we obviously still have work to do in other areas. And I'm going to turn it over to Ron in a moment to let him talk about some of the specifics here. But I will say also that just as a way of acknowledgement, that a lot of work goes into this from other members of Ron's staff and also from the district staff, not only in the business office, but in human resources to help assemble some of the data that's required. And we also have to reach out to some of the school-based staff, such as Michelle, the administrative assistant here, and other folks to provide this. So I think it's just important to take a moment and thank those folks publicly for the work that they do to contribute to this document. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ron and let him give you an introduction. And the other thing I should just mention is, because of our rescheduled meetings here, Ron was able to squeeze us in, but he can only be here until 6:30. So we need to move expeditiously through this. But he has made clear that when we receive the full audit and management letter, if there's a desire to have him participate again for another discussion, he's willing and able to do that. So Ron, why don't I turn over to you? If you heard any of that.
He's talking now. I think you actually accidentally turned it down when you were
Uh-oh.
up there last time.
All right, hold on, Ron. I might have turned you down by moving it around. Hold on a second, Ron. Okay, we turned you back up, so if you could start again, we couldn't hear you there, but we should be able to hear you now.
I apologize you all for not being there physically. My schedule after when Nate told me it changed, the time changed, I just couldn't be there tonight, but I wish I was, and certainly, I look forward to in January or whenever you want me to come back after you get the full product, to come back and do a face-to-face presentation with you all. So, I would start off by saying I think Nate summed it up well. Going back in time, I think this is our 4th year of doing business with you all, that when we started, you didn't have any carryover balance. You guys are in the hole of $3 million and certainly had a lot of other issues and struggles, there in your finance department. I know some of your board members, lived through those challenges, and I can say that you've come up a long way since then, to the point where you actually do have carryover balance. To the point where this in 2018, I believe you actually used about $1.1 million for tax relief. We actually believe when it comes to 2019 budget that you guys are working on right now, that there'll be actually the same amount of money there available to throw at tax relief again. And I think that that's all good news, for the Burlington School District, because you didn't have that opportunity, 4 years ago when we started out there. Things were really lean. And now I think that with the budget controls that you put into place, there's a lot of improvements. You guys are now really understanding your budget, and Nate's working real hard with his staff, to make sure that they provide you with good business information so that you guys make good business decisions. And I think it was a very challenging year for Nate this year. He lost his whole right extension, the finance department, and we're still able to have this conversation in December with you all. So kudos to Nate and his staff for allowing me to be able to participate at some level here tonight, to share with you the financial information, for the school system. Some of the other positive things that I'll say in the product before I talk about social concern. School watch grew, your fund balance carryover balance grew by $1.4 million to $1.4 million. It grew about $200,000 in 2016. So there's encouraging signs. The not so good news is that you needed that to have happen because with some of the special changes going on to the program, you're going to see some shrinking revenue, coming into that program. And I think that your food service program is certainly in a good position to weather, that storm because you've got carryover balance. And $1.4 million, I think, is amazing, for a food service program your size and a district your size to have that kind of money. I think you're doing some right things in that area.
Ron, I just want to interrupt you for a moment, if I can.
The IRS rebate, some of those people
Or
we're
not.
talking about for 2.5 years, guess what? They showed up this year. Through a lot of hard work and effort, over at the city and with your staff, that money showed up. I still think there's a little money left out there for a variety of reasons and sequestration and certainly a lot of things played face through that, but I would argue that everything that we expected, to be getting from the Internal Revenue Service has either shown up or is in the works to be shown up, and I think that's another positive, step in the right direction. Benefits were an issue last year. They were certainly the allocation of benefits, the handling of benefits. There's been some staffing changes in that area. That area improved as well. So those areas, we definitely saw some improvement in those areas. And I know that there's a lot of hard work, that's put in those areas, but we see improvement. And if somebody says, Ross, what's your biggest talking point? Student accounts again. I think that, Nate had to pick his battles this past year, especially with the staff turnover in his department. You still got a lot of struggle and a lot of exposure that we see out there with the student activity accounts, you guys, and we definitely, there needs to be some resources, as we've been sharing with Nate, that need to be directed at that and like now, so.
Great. Thanks, Ron. So I'll speak over here to hopefully allow Ron to hear any questions that you folks want to start with. I'll just repeat them to him. I'll let you call.
Can I get clarity on the accounts it's not that we weren't paying attention to them, it was that there wasn't the low-hanging fruit over the last couple of years. I mean, it wasn't something that we could easily address over the last couple of years, right?
Right.
We didn't have controls over things, never mind
Yeah.
some student accounts.
There's a handful of different issues that we've encountered with the student accounts, some of which we tried to address and were somewhat more low-hanging, so to speak, but some of the others just involve more investment in training of both business office staff and the staff at the school level. So, for example, what we've done is try to go out and incorporate training on how those activity accounts should be used when we do like our annual administrative assistant training and that sort of thing. That's a good start, but it's not nearly enough. An example where we had what we tried to make an investment in, which was we purchased a module for our accounting software so that we can bring those accounts kind of into our accounting software. So we have that. The advantage of that is that we will be able to monitor centrally what's going on in those accounts, whereas right now they're all maintained at the school levels, and so the only way we can get kind of insight into them is we have to go out to the schools and look at an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. So so we've got the tool now. We started to invest in training of the staff to use it, and we have to do some kind of setup for it. Unfortunately, that staff member ended up having an opportunity to move closer to home, and so that was an investment that didn't work out, but we're going to have to just repeat that.
So I'm just going to stay on this just for 1 second, 'cause I'm reading your mind on some of these things.
It's okay.
So we had bank accounts out there using the school's tax ID that we found,
Yep.
right? We had
People
we had
using the
accounts
money
that-
for unapproved,
We had
for
accounts that had
no
been.
approval for
We
use
had
of money.
accounts for the class of 1974, or something like that, right? There was some, or 94, something like, it's like, class graduated 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and the account was still open, right?
People
Do we-
borrowing from the
Yeah.
account for.
Do we have that captured at least?
uses.
I mean, at least to this, we feel confident that we have 95% of the unknown is now known.
It'd be hard to, it's hard to capture what percentage of the unknown by definition, but I think that we know a lot more about what the problems are.
It's a risk assessment.
Right, we know a lot more about what the problems are, and I think some of the most obvious areas where people were not correctly using those accounts, we've been able to tackle. But there's still just the problem of controls in general. Just because something big hasn't gone wrong doesn't mean that we have the controls in place to ensure that it won't go wrong. And so that's one of the things that we need to really emphasize is setting up the controls, having staff, and setting them up, frankly, is the easy part. Having staff trained in understanding them and following them is the important way to ensure that you don't find yourself in a situation where something, really disastrous happens. Ron, do you want to add anything? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I heard everything you say, and I think Nate said it well, but I would be not doing you guys a service if I didn't put a little bit more emphasis. I still think you got some bigger problems out there than just training. I think you've got some procedural and best practice issues, and they certainly are something that, that are still gonna need to be dragged in. That's my thought as you're outside of looking in, so.
Oh, please, I'm sorry. Commissioner Curry.
So my question is around capacity, just staying on the issue of kind of the business office's capacity. I guess, Ron, my question is, when you look at a district our size, what's the optimal capacity for the business office to be able to manage its compliance responsibilities and then manage a district of this size with this many moving parts? What's the optimal capacity you would recommend?
Well, I can tell you that this actual question, came up, I would say year 1 or year 2, in our audit, and I don't think that you were at that optimal size. I'm not sure if you're there now, but I know you're closer to it, because I believe that we've added a body of positions. If there's one person that I would argue that you would want to think about doing, that would be a non-accountant that's got some accounting expertise, a compliance person, I think they handle a variety of matters like student accounts, would really be a body that I would think about at that distance. And I think that would be a good complement to that finance office. And that's where we staff, that's where we're seeing, we do, oh my goodness, I'll bet you 250 school systems in the state of Vermont and 30 supervised units in 5 of Vermont's largest school systems. So we think that you're about an average capacity. We think that you probably, we need to really take a look at some of the areas, where there could be some improvement in. And I think that there's going to be a common denominator, could be compliance. And that would be an area that I would certainly consider, giving it some real serious considerations if I were you all, because I think that position would more than pay for itself.
Commissioner Witt?
Just so I have a sense of the scope of the student accounts
But
issue.
I'm still not sure you got enough bodies. I know you got more bodies than we started, and I think that was a step in the right direction. But I think now it's looking at the bodies, identifying where your needs are, and I think compliance would be a need as well.
What's the aggregate dollar amount in these student accounts at any given time? Do we have any sense?
The aggregate dollar amount at any given time, off the top of my head, we're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the high school. High school is by far the largest. So I'd have to go back and look. We can look in the materials, but I'm going to say it's at least a few $100,000 that are in the accounts overall at any given point in time. I think we'd say that's probably about right, Ron. I don't know if you actually have looked at that.
I would probably argue when they go out to some of their fundraisers things, I think I'd argue you probably have close to somewhere between $600,000 and $800,000 over the high school.
So potentially even more. But and there's obviously money going in and out, so there's a lot of transactions.
So this is like the PTO's pot? Or the
Not the
boosters'
PTOs.
pot? No.
No, these are, for example, anytime there's any sort of fundraising event done by students, it would go into a student activity account. And then there's also, one of the issues is we've had, through a longstanding practice, the gate receipts at the high school have gone into these accounts, which I think I would argue the long term, that doesn't belong in those accounts. I mean, number one, we want to properly, account for it and have the controls, but I think long term that probably shouldn't go into those accounts at all. Another one that we talked about was revenue that was from high school parking passes, which again is more like district revenue that we should be maintaining on our kind of main account. The student accounts are really supposed to be money that we're holding in trust, that students raise, we're holding in trust, and they are essentially determining the use of those funds. That's the idea behind it, and that's one of the issues we've had is they've kind of been commingled with this idea of other money that's generated kind of by school activities, but it's really district revenue, but the schools have kind of just taken it in and put it into their accounts.
Go ahead. Do we have a written policy on how we ideally want to handle these accounts?
We have a draft of kind of, it's not, I would guess I wouldn't call it a policy in the language that we're using in
Small P
here.
policy.
It's more like
Procedure.
a set of
Procedures.
that we've developed. And so that's an example of something that we need to then not only, it's not as simple as just sending it out and expecting people to be able to follow and understand it. What we really need to do is invest in the time to train the staff who's administrative, which often ends up being the school-based administrative assistants on how to use it. But when we have that and we can combine it with having the financial tool at their disposal that is much more robust than an Excel spreadsheet, which is
Right.
prone to any human error, right? But also allows us to support that work centrally, to do bank reconciliations on their behalf, for example, instead of trying to rely on them to do it. That'll give us a lot more oversight into the progress that they're making or not making, but it'll certainly allow us to react much sooner than in an annual audit. We
Right.
just haven't had the capacity to take that on. I think that we can do that this coming year. It's not without challenges because it's another thing that we haven't done, but we need to do it, obviously.
That is one of the key challenges around that, because we've identified we need to do that, but it's finding the time and also training all the people from central office as well as the key people and office assistants in the office. But also, we need to train the staff, because the staff are the ones that actually implement those things, and then they deliver dollars or receipts to the office and they just put it away. But there's a long, extended timeline that we need to kind of implement, and we need to find the time and resources to do that. and to ensure that that happens in the proper way.
Right.
Commissioner Barlow? I'm good. Anyone else? I do have a question. Two things. Where is, we always like to look at the key lines, right? So I just noticed that there was one actually under food services on a deficit line that was highlighted in blue on
Tell us where you're at and we'll
Schedule D,
scroll through.
page 23.
I will remember, because something's highlighted, this is draft, so they might have been like.
Oh, that's fine. I just want to make sure it's not significant.
Yeah. See what it is.
Schedule
Keep
D,
going,
you'll
keep
see it.
going.
It comes right up in blue on the second column from the right.
Okay, where are the D's? Hold on. Let's see here.
Come down right there. No, one more, a little bit. There it is.
There it is.
I just didn't know if that was
Are you looking at
significant.
like the vocational fund?
Oh, he's looking at
Yes.
the vocational fund, yeah. That's actually, I don't know why it's highlighted, and I can check and look into it if there was a question about that. But that number is a positive. That's not a, I mean, that's a good news number in the set. Other than the fact that it's highlighted, we want to know if there was any reason that some of the other audit staff was rechecking that number, but it's,
And I know this
In the right
is,
direction.
okay, and I know this is the draft.
yep.
We've been briefed on this for years as to what a draft means, that the numbers can change based on the refinement. Can you go to the bottom line, where the most important line item, which is what do we expect to have
Yep.
in the,
So if you scroll up to the top of the document, the very first schedule, I'll just point it out here. So down a little, down one more page, okay, right there, so read it right there. So we're on, so for folks who are following on their device or at home, who can't see this, on page 3 of this draft. The first column here is the general fund, you can see. And then if you go down to the fund balances, this is what Ron was talking about. Here's your unassigned fund balance. That's money that we're free to use in the fiscal year 2019 budget. Last year, that number was a tick over $1.1 million. This year, it's a little bit less, but we're kind of close enough in the ballpark that I don't think, that's not going to be a problem for us from a budgetary side. And that's the number that we, when Ron was talking about tax relief, that's the number that you put toward your budget, which means that, again, it's one-time money, but if you didn't have that, if we didn't generate that, then we would be looking at either reducing the budget by that amount or increasing the burden on taxpayers by that amount. You can kind of pick your approach, but the idea is this offsets the need for either one of those.
The give back is, I'm gonna call it the give back, right? The state give back, the clawback is in
claw-
there. But last
The
year's
cla-
number
no,
was
no,
not.
just
No,
because
it's
the
not.
That's from
clawback,
Act 46.
That's right, we're not getting that money.
right,
That's right, it's different.
That's-
I got you.
clawback from the state is something that started this fiscal year,
Yeah, we
fiscal
didn't
year
get that.
18 and 19. So this, what we're looking at up here, to remind folks, is the way we ended fiscal year 17, which ended this past
That's right.
June
That's right.
30th. So
Sorry.
that'll be reflected in our next audit, just means we'll have less money
Wasn't
there.
last year's number one, wasn't last year's unassigned, wasn't that two numbers combined? Wasn't
Well,
that,
there was some carry forward, but
Yep.
most importantly, when Act 46, when we had to comply with Act 46, we had a one-time plug to
Right.
prevent deeper cuts. That would have been $1 million cut when we had Act 46, if we hadn't compensated for.
no, but I thought last year's, I
right,
thought the
Mark.
Well, there was a-
2016
yeah.
unassigned.
What you're thinking of is
was-
the fact that when we had the big refund from Burlington Electric overcharging
Right.
places, we got a whole lot of money in, and we had a situation, so we had that situation, and then we had, when we were working through a budget process like the next year, we were not this far along in our audit, so we had to estimate what our fund balance would be, and we made a conservative estimate. The result was that we ended up having slightly more in our fund balance. So that addition, that's the kind of prior year fund balance that you were saying was kind of left over plus the new surplus we generated. So it was a little bit of leftover money because we had to do an estimate plus the new fund balance. This time, now we're at a point where we know that number, and that's a pretty solid number at this point. Like, some things in the audit will change. I don't expect there to be any material change in that amount. So that's what I'm using as I start to work through our budget process and look at kind of the revenue side that we're going to need to support the budget we talk about later.
And we're confident you all. We're confident you all in these numbers too. So.
Mind if I ask another question? I'm sorry. We've been going through this for 3 years now. And we started 4 years ago. This is our third audit, maybe.
I think it's at least our fourth.
Is it our fourth with these
Yeah.
guys? Okay.
Yep.
So,
least.
on a district of our size, what should be the plus or minus we'd be looking for the end of the year? I mean, to where we said, okay, we did pretty darn good. You do it with your taxes, right? So, perfect world, you're either paying up to $250 or getting back $250. That means you didn't give anybody, you didn't loan anybody money, right? So in this world where we, I forget, what was the general fund budget?
Yeah, about 70 million.
70 million, so 1/70th,
Right,
right? Less than 1.5%.
right.
Is that good? I mean, is it, or, is it,
Well, I'll let
or
Ron
should we try to
give
get it
his-
even closer than that? Are we, is it just because we're,
Do you want me to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how our opinions might differ on this, but go for it, Ron.
So a couple of things. One, it's hard to compare any of the other traditional school systems in Vermont because they're not school districts. You actually have a charter, in place that governs your school district. So that takes one of the big statutes out, which actually limits carryovers for other school systems to reduce tax relief like the next budget year. So having said that, with somebody your size, what we would like to see is typically the lowest benchmark we want to see for a municipality is 30 days of your operating surplus. Yeah, 30 days, which is the equivalent of 8% of your operating budget in a carryover balance. What we tell school systems, is because of the constraints and because of the other statutory requirements, and basically being forced to use your money for tax relief, we like to see that number somewhere at 3 or 4%. So what does that mean in Burlington's terms? If you've got a $70 million budget, you do some quick arithmetic, so if you got down to that 8%, you'd be looking at about $6 million, or you'd be looking at somewhere between $2.5 to $3 million at 15 days, of your surplus. And that's where we'd like to see you guys at. So you're not there yet. I honestly don't know how you get there, but the hole you had to drag yourself out of 3 years ago was just enormous. And I think you guys have made great strides. But we'd like to see about 3% of your operating budget.
My last question. Sorry, guys.
You got 2 minutes for the Ron, so.
You're churning. I can see your mind churning.
We've got a couple more minutes.
This question's
I know we gotta let Ron go. Well, maybe exactly 2 more minutes. If there's any other.
I mean, I guess the only thing I'm thinking about is whether, this fund balance was not budgeted for in the previous, in this year's budget. We're not budgeting a carryover of fund balance for the explicit purpose of a fund balance carryover from year to year.
No.
We're expecting one,
Well,
but, and so I don't know if that's a,
I
or
wouldn't even put
hoping
it quite
for
like
one.
that. Right. So essentially, the FY18 budget, the projected general fund spending exceeds our projected general fund revenue by about $1.1 million. But the reason that we're not concerned about that is because we knew we had, from our last audit, about $1.1 million of fund balance. And so being in this position again gives us the ability to not have to go in and either reduce spending to that tune or to raise taxes. Now, the important question is, okay, well, where does that money come from? And as we can show you on future statements, it's a combination of, I think approximately 40% of it was items where we received revenue in excess of what we anticipated. For example, it happened to be a really good year when it came to getting impact fees from the city. I think we earned over $100,000. It was substantially more. This year we're not on pace to do that again, for example. That's the kind of one-time nature of these things.
Mhm.
And about $600,000 of it was spread across our $70 million general fund operating budget. So it's a combination of, not, being able to stay within your spending limits, and then also generating some revenue that you didn't anticipate. If we didn't have one or the other of those, we wouldn't be in this $1.1 million range. We'd be at a significantly lower number.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Can I add a little bit here, Nate?
Sure.
Please. Yes.
So one of the things that I would just add to this, if you guys remember it was the first 3 years, we had almost every expense category, cost center there for your school system overdrafted. This year, you have like 2 for a total of about $240,000. So that tells me you got some better budget controls out there, certainly than what you did, which is allowing you to return some of this back. But at the same time, I would just say this. That unassigned fund balance, that carryover balance that we're talking about, $1 million, $1.1 million, that represents like 1% of your total operating budget. And that doesn't really, if I'm sitting there as a commissioner for the school district, I'm not feeling really good about that because a couple of special ed students, moving into your school system could really put a damper on $1 million back. So that's why I say we really need to understand and protect what it is that you have.
Commissioner Barlow.
Is this entire fund balance available for our fiscal 19 budget? I know sometimes there's timing issues around that. Okay,
Yeah.
good, thank you.
I just want to say, I didn't ask questions because Commissioners Porter and Curry beat me to it, but it is also the case that a tornado that tears a roof off the school could eat up a fund balance, and any student who moves into our district is entitled to an education, and it is not fair to hold up special ed students as a cost to the district and a burden.
Good point. Anything else? Okay, so when do he did offer to come back?
And I think it makes sense to wait until we have the final numbers. We'll have them in
Okay.
January. January might not be the right time just because of the budget work we'll be doing then, but.
Be the
we'll
right
work
time to give us a
schedule around-
confidence level of, are we at $1 million or are we at 500,000?
Oh, we're not, yeah.
Yeah.
They're pretty
we're close.
confident about it.
In this case, we're confident in this. The things that
Okay.
they're working to iron out are not like these elements of the statements.
Right.
They're like getting the little notes about our OPEB obligations that go in the kind of footnotes in the audit and stuff. It's not major stuff. I think that's fair to say, right, Ron?
Yeah, correct, Nate, correct.
Thank you. You guys all set?
Okay.
Ron, thank you.
Listen, Merry Christmas, you all. I really hope I get the opportunity to see you, and it doesn't sound like January, but February. So whatever you'll have me. I look
Sounds
forward
great.
to it.
Thank you.
See you then.
And Nate, I just want to say thank you to Nate. I mean, amazing amount
Yeah.
of work.
Yes, thank you, Nate.
I just love the auditor that talks like me. Opportunity. You gotta have an opportunity.
These are mean.
I like exactly what he's saying. Okay, moving on to the adjusted agenda. At this point, we'll move on to public comment. Is there anyone from the audience that would like to speak, please? Please.
Any location or just?
Whatever you feel comfortable. We would like them, yeah, come up in front of them. It'll be easy for you.
My name is Dan Cunningham. I'm a Burlington resident, and if you haven't seen any of the emails read, the post that I made, I submitted a public records request to the superintendent's office at 8:30 Friday. That request asked for a copy of the superintendent's contract that the board has said publicly exists. That was due to me under the Vermont Public Records Law at 5 o'clock tonight. I did not receive it, and I didn't receive any sort of formal denial. So the Vermont Public Records Act is very explicit about the fact that if a document is announced to the public that it exists, it needs to be delivered. So this is a fairly major violation. And I intend to get the document for the public. It's not allowed to be holding it in secret. The board announced from a press release that it exists. It's announced in the minutes that it exists. And you need to follow Vermont law into this. And there are pretty significant penalties as well if this goes to court and you lose. So I just want to let you know, if that's out there, we are going to obtain it for the public, and just to keep everybody on the same page on it. Thanks.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak?
Hi, my name is Claire Wool. I'm a parent volunteer in the school system. I'm just asking or inquiring about the teacher's contract and the paraeducator's contract. It's the end of the month. School break begins this Friday, and we will not resume until the first week in January. And it was my hope that this contract and the Paris contract would have been signed by now. And I'm just representing a concerned group of Burlingtonians regarding this contract, both contracts. And I wanted to ask if there was anyone assigned from the school board to the para negotiations, so that there would be a point person from the school board that we could reach out to. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Keith, you're not going to get up here?
I'm Nicole Tuig. I live in Ward 5. I'm a parent of 2 Champlain Elementary school students. I'm also going to raise the issue about the teacher's contract. I've heard that negotiations on the sticking point issues that I think were mentioned at the last board meeting have broken down completely, and that there is the possibility that no contract will be signed at this point. So I'm sort of interested to hear what the current status of the teacher's contract is, because I know that there is that ripple effect with the Paris contract and any other outstanding contracts that are out there. And if no contract is signed, what the next steps are for the teachers, and what happens then. Are we back to the imposition standing with relationship with the teachers, and how does that work? So I'd like some sort of answer or response from the board on that, if possible, so that the community can be aware of what's going on. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll close public comment, move on to board reflections. Are there any board reflections?
Just one quick.
Commissioner Witt?
I just always like to thank everyone for coming out and taking the time to speak your mind. That would be my comment. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sure the board does too.
Any other public comment? Any other board reflections? Commissioner Curry?
I'll just ask that we get a formal update from the superintendent on the contracts. I think you sent us one on email, but I don't know if it's confidential or not. So I don't want to take the liberty to share it, but that would just be my request. And
Okay. All right, seeing no one else, I'll close board reflections at this time. 6:39. We'll now move on to the budget presentation.
Thank you, Chair Porter. A couple of announcements that actually impact our budget. One would be sort of the latest update on contracts that impact our budget. Now I'm going to turn to Senior Director Lavery to give us an update. We've been doing some considerable work over the last few weeks and up until today, the last minute, to try to resolve some of the challenges in order for us to sort of move forward.
So with respect to the teacher contract, we had a response on Friday, and then we responded back to the BEA today. There's just a couple little minor pieces of language, one related to putting in an emergency exception for use of leave days at a certain period, and also kind of similar theme around some changes that were made to when the high school can have faculty meetings, and again, just a kind of a getting clarity between the two sides about when and the frequency of those meetings. So I think they're pretty minor issues, and I suspect that our counterparts would agree there. And as far as at least we know, those are the only two things out there right now. So the optimist in me says that this definitely could be done by the end of the calendar year if nothing else is raised, and we haven't been raising any other issues. So those were the two that the BA had raised, and I think we've pretty much worked it out with them. So I'm not really sure where where a suggestion like the talks have broken down or something, I mean, that's just completely not true. And I would certainly appreciate understanding, I think, on all our behalf, where that's coming from, because whoever is spreading that either isn't talking to people, presumably isn't talking to BEA leadership or district leadership, if that's what they're suggesting. So that's the status of the teacher negotiation. The para negotiation, that one's further from the end. We had a mediation earlier in December, I think, as the board and other folks know. We moved, I think we got a little closer, but we didn't get to an agreement on that. We have been subsequently in touch with their representation. They're also represented by Vermont NEA, and we've been in touch with them about trying to figure out if there's a way we can have some kind of interim agreement. And we've just had an email exchange today, as a matter of fact, that I saw from our attorney, showing kind of where we are in that process. So we haven't succeeded in that, but we do have a plan in place to ensure that even in the absence of any type of agreement, that come January, when we have the new health insurance plans, that all the paras are still covered.
So let's just do this one, let him get through the budget presentation, and then we'll have questions after. So if you have a question, go ahead and we'll just.
Yeah, so tell me if I understand this correctly. As a board member, if somebody asks me on the street, how come the contract hasn't been signed? You know, do you really care about kids? Why are you waiting so long? And that we got last Friday got a change in wording, and we're working on that. And we want to do this as quickly as we can, and we can do it as quickly as the other
Right.
side works with us.
Yeah, I mean, both,
Yeah.
you know, I think there's been a good faith effort on part of both parties. The BA raised some of, I would, again, characterize them as relatively minor concerns about language. They weren't anything that I think was like really dramatic. It was just one of those things where they wanted to make sure that the final language, you know, was going to be palatable to their members. And frankly, we want that too. So it's useful to hear if they have concerns. And we've been working with them, particularly specifically with Dan Hagan. It's mostly really, you know, coming from him through some of the language around the high school. So there's not any, as far as I know, there's no cause for any kind of major concern. And I think where I do think that people understandably are feeling is like, oh, it feels like this process was done, and they're hoping that they know that when we actually do get to ink this, then they will get to receive the retroactive pay increase. Right, so we pay them essentially for as though they had been working under this new contract from the beginning of the contract year. So that's obviously a nice little bonus to get when it happens, and we would have liked to actually have had it done before the holidays, just for the kind of usefulness that can bring during the holiday period, but we're not quite there, and so it'll have to wait another few weeks.
Go ahead and go.
A few quick caveats before we start our presentation. One of the things I want to kind of outline, when we deliver a budget, budget is an opportunity to sort
George,
of.
if you could come to the nurse's office. George, to the nurse's office, please. Thank you.
Okay, George. Budget's an opportunity. It's part sort of a strategic document and also sort of a moral document, sort of emphasize our priorities and the direction that the district and the board is willing to go towards in terms of supporting our students. And so we've done considerable work in trying to represent that in terms of the voices we've heard throughout the course of the year, the reflections from the board members. At the same time, considering some of the challenges that may be coming at the state level. Last year, we had to deal with a number of challenges. Well, actually, the last couple of years, we've dealt with different challenges that have come at the state level. And we anticipate that there will be something this year as well, too. We've seen memos talking about class ratios, around spending, and we're kind of preparing, anticipating that something could come forward. But at the same time, we prepared this budget in thinking in sort of in a positive term that nothing comes forward, and this is what we would present at this time. You'll see in the budget presentation, I know what most people want to see is the end product in terms of the tax impact. And some of the slides that Nathan will speak to shows that there are some of the variable numbers that we need to calculate that are not in yet, so we won't be able to see that. But we have presented enough information for you to get an idea of the analysis and also to present some of the possible investments that we're considering, and then we'll take the next steps from there. Okay.
So this presentation, which we'll get up online, contains a handful of slides that I'll move through rather quickly because they're elements that you folks have seen before, but we wanted to. What tends to happen in my experience, right, is people are going to go on the website and they're not going to look at every single presentation we've posted since the beginning. They're going to look at one. So we've kept some of this content. I know it's familiar to you, just so folks might be accessing it for the first time. The first one talks about some of the efforts we made to solicit input and ideas from community members, from staff and school leadership, from department directors, and also from our student board members who've participated here in the past and other avenues. So this is just a brief overview of that. There were a number of themes that came out of our public forums that we had. We had 4 of them across the district, and this slide talks about a number of those themes. And I would suggest that you will find, after you see what we bring forward in terms of specific proposals, that a number of these themes are addressed to some degree. Certainly not all of them, and not necessarily to the degree that we might like to address them all, but they're touched on. On the next slide as well, we talked about this at the last meeting. We got from our staff and principals a list of ideas and requests to add to the budget. Came up to well over $6 million. Again, you'll see that a number of these items are addressed in the proposals that will come forward. So I think it's just important to point that out, that sometimes people have the opportunity to provide input through one of the public processes or through through our strategic planning process that staff was engaged in, or principals at district leadership meetings. And I think it's important to point out that that's not just something that happens in order to give people time to kind of speak to directly, that actually does make its way into a final product here. And so I would just invite you to keep that in mind, and you can certainly scroll back and see some of those themes. So another thing we talked about last time, and I won't go through every single one, but are some of the budget pressures that we're facing. And these aren't necessarily things that people said our school district really needs more health reimbursement arrangements or something. But these are important investments and benefits and other things that we provide to employees in some cases, or they're just other things that are creating pressure in our budget. And the one I want to just pause on again is the legislative environment, to remind folks that we know that there is approximately a $50 million deficit in the education fund, and that based on the projections from the Agency of Education, by projections I mean projections they're doing about school spending statewide, that deficit would increase. And so what we've seen publicly from the Agency of Education is an idea, or what we've seen from them, not an idea, an actual statement about the fact that the tax revenue is going to not be sufficient based on the dollar yield to produce as much money in the education fund as it had in the prior year. The result of that means that the underlying what they call the dollar yield, is less. So a dollar tax rate's producing is going to result in a lower ed fund balance, which means that in order to make up that deficit, the underlying tax rate has to increase. So I'll come back to this, but the point is there's that upward pressure on tax rates to begin with. There's also been some discussion, and I attended the governor's education summit this past Monday. Commissioner Olwell was there also, and so certainly I invite you to chime in here. But one of the themes that the governor and the Secretary of Education repeated was the concern about the number of staff in schools. They talk about, again, they're talking at a statewide level, but they're talking about the number of adults essentially to children in schools, and they're expressing, in my view, a concern that is that there are too many, and that is how we should tackle the challenge of funding education in Vermont, namely by reducing the number of staff in schools. As you'll see from our presentation, we have not proposed to do that. But it's worth noting that we could be forced to, in the same manner that we were forced to give up essentially some of our revenue in the form of the health insurance withholding. So I just think it's important to understand that legislative context, even though we haven't tried to read the tea leaves or predict, make some prediction about what will happen legislatively. Something will likely happen, and we don't know what it looks like. So it's important to know that's the context. We didn't reduce any staff or make any projections, but we know that it's possible that we will be directed to do that by state law. We've covered these other budget pressures, so I won't linger on them. Let's just move ahead. And we covered example of the state formula that hurts BSD in the past. Again, this just shows that the rate at which we are reimbursed is on the basis of a statewide average, but given that our average wage is higher than that, we actually come out short, so to speak, over $300,000, whereas districts that are at or below this statewide average obviously wouldn't have that difference. Do you want to cover your strategic goals in brief?
Sure.
And then-
One of the things as I opened up in terms of when we're starting to plan the budget, we think about what are the strategic budget goals. And so similar and consistent to last year, we looked at our strategic goal priorities around sustainable finance facilities, equitable climate, culture, and inclusive teaching and learning. And of course, looking at our system assets around student, staff, programs, and capital facilities. So those are the big bulk pieces we have to look at. We also make some determination around what we can do in terms of sustainability and also support for the future. We have to not just think about the present, but also think about forecasting forward. How do we sustain what we're doing to ensure that the district and the board continues to move in a positive direction? We're still on the vision of trying to develop a multi-year strategic planning approach. It is difficult with the way Vermont structures its budgeting process and what we have to go through every year, but at the same time, we are finding ways to do multi-year planning with our programmatic programs and being able to find ways to support them throughout a 3 or 4 year approach. So we're still engaged in that. Data-informed decisions. You saw many presentations from our staff in terms of how they're allocating resources and how they're coming forward to ask for supports based on data. When I talk about data, I mean the empirical data, but also the soft data as well too. So it's contextual in terms of, we got the numbers, but also we hear the stories in terms of what might have an impact. And you'll see some examples Nate will share around our equity index formula, how we apply that it's not just straight, okay, we use the formula, but then there's a conversation around what does that really mean, and if it makes sense, if we need to do a write-up or not. Once again, the other piece that we really look at is an equity lens. How are we doing in terms of being equitable in terms of distribution of resources based on the needs of our schools? And we mean equity, not equality. And that's actually been a challenge in terms of talking with our system leaders and our staff along the way in terms of what is the real difference, because people get that confused and think, okay, we need this, and we say, okay, as a district or as a system, this is our need, this is our most needed, we need to direct those resources there. That's equity, not necessarily equality, spreading it out. So we've started to put metrics in that we can kind of measure and be able to evaluate that and give responses back to our staff to support them. And we have seen some better sort of proposals since we've been doing that. People coming with the right data and giving the right information in order for us to be able to have some really good consideration in terms of what goes in. You'll see that reflected into the in our process. And one of the things I was happy to see was the big list you had there around the $6 million, and then what the staff came up with, and then the final product of some of the recommendations were pretty consistent in terms of what people were identifying, and that felt good that, hey, these were our top things that people were saying that we really need. So I know we'll get lots of support around many of the items there.
Oh, we lost our connection. Ooh.
We need funds for technology.
Thanks, Carson. So the next slide, again, is a slide that's familiar, and it just speaks broadly to the approach that we took to budgeting, which talks about both looking at opportunities to carve out savings from within our budget, and then reinvesting those savings, as well as making new investments on the basis of the strategic priorities that have been developed. So we covered this slide last time. We just, one of the things we often hear is, oh, we should make reductions to central office, and we wanted to just provide examples that show, as a reminder, that is also something that we don't ignore and we look carefully at.
Yeah. Can I just make an emphasis on this part here? You heard from our auditors today in terms of the supports that we do need to get it right, right? So at some point, I mean, we've done a really good job of really tightening our belts at the central office level, but we're getting to the point where we've done enough of that, and we're looking at, okay, what else do we need? And you heard from the auditors in terms of, in order to get that compliance piece, we may need to start looking at adding the right type of resources. So don't be surprised if we start coming forward, asking for that level of support in order to meet the goals that the board has set out.
Okay, so a couple, again, this is familiar, but just we wanted to highlight some of those areas where we don't have much in the way of options. These are just things that we either, on the basis of state law changes or requirements or kind of reasonably predictable things where we face potential spending, increased spending pressure. And this area highlights 5 of the priority areas that we wanted to make sure were addressed in the proposal that we brought forward. Both, and some of these represent additional new items that you'll see, and other times it's just maintaining kind of what we have, but to give folks an idea of what are the ways that these investments were prioritized. These were the things that we said are the top priorities.
And you'll have to remember this slide, because once we get to the investments pieces, and at some point, maybe the next meeting, if we have to have conversations around what investments do we going to put forward, if we have to reduce some things, we'll come back to this slide and say, these were the major things that we want to make sure that we support first, and that's how we'll use an analysis in terms of determining what goes and what stays, so.
We covered, again, just the kind of enrollment trends at the district. The high school were well within the budgeted amount projected in FY19. And on the next slide, you'll see the middle and elementary schools. There's a slight, one more. You can see middle school projected to increase slightly and a decline in the elementary enrollment. Pretty substantial decline over the past couple of years.
Yeah. These 2 slides, I know I did a presentation a while back on in terms of enrollment, and one of the messages we really wanted to send is, there's been conversations at the state level around declining enrollment across the state, and that is true, and that's also true for us in Burlington. I know some people feel that we're not in that situation, and what's happened in the last few years, we've had a significant boost up from our refugee immigrant students that we used to get every year. We're not getting those same level of influx, so now we're starting to see a little bit of a dip. So if you look at our numbers, our elementary numbers are a bit lower. We have a little bit of a spike in middle school, but that I don't really consider that a spike. And you look at the high school, we've trended down in terms of numbers already. So overall, we're slightly down. We're not as significant as the rest of Vermont, but we're not trending up where we're getting more dollars for more students at this point. So that's important to note.
So at the last meeting, we were asked to provide a more specific example of our efforts around developing a kind of systemic way to incorporate equity concerns into our budgeting process. And so I wanted to take a few minutes to show you this. And if you recall from the slide that Yao spoke to earlier, this kind of addresses both the kind of strategic priority related to equity, but also that data-informed decision process. You can see I wrote kind of 3 steps, and I'll go through them in detail here. But let me start with the chart just so folks can kind of understand what they're looking at. We have projected enrollment for both of the middle schools for next year, and we're projecting them to both end up about at the same level, give or take. We then look at, based on the education quality standards, how many core teachers do we need just in order to stay within those class size limits, which our intention is to stay within those. So that says at a minimum, to be compliant with those standards, you'd need 17 teachers at each of the schools. Not 17, I should be clear, this isn't 17 total, meaning including special educators, including your gym teacher. We're talking about kind of the core teachers. Not ELL. Nope. So 17 core teachers at each school is the basis right there. That's actually up one from the allocation that we had for the current year based on, as you just saw, the increase projection in middle school enrollment.
That's only based on just the enrollment.
Yeah.
Nothing to the right of that.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is just, that's the beginning of this process, as we're saying. It's saying at a minimum, if you want to meet those standards, you need this many core teachers. Then what we did was, this was over a year ago, I guess maybe about 2 years ago now even, we convened principals and other district leaders, and we had them discuss what are the types of needs-based factors that really impact, that, you know, and that need to be considered for staffing at the schools. And they identified the EL count, poverty count, and the IEP count. It's important to notice, to note that they understood and acknowledged that, particularly for English learner students and students on IEPs, there are other teaching resources that we put into place to support those students. But even though we put in those other resources, there's still kind of an impact on the general need in the school. And so that's what this represents here is, again, we're thinking how many of these kind of core level teachers do we need on the, in the school on the basis of these factors. So we just have a pretty simple approach here. You add up those students, each one is, you know, kind of counts as one, falling in that category. We add them up into that total count, the equity needs count, and then we just look at the share across the two schools. So what's interesting to observe is here are two middle schools. Our projection for next year is that they will have approximately the same total enrollment in terms of head count. But if you look at the distribution of those other needs-based factors, you can see that it's about a 60-40 split between the two schools. So I think that's just an important thing to understand is that if you looked at just column one, you'd say, well, they should have exactly the same level of resource. But when you start to look at these other factors, you can see that there's reason to consider making adjustments to that. So what we then do, I said, you know, step number one, determine the number of core teachers. Step number two, distribute the additional resources. So if we have additional resources, and we do have additional teachers in this case, we put them and we say, okay, if we were just to do this by pure, simple arithmetic, right? Kind of every additional teaching resource that we put in there, we would split roughly 60-40 between the two locations. However, it's not always that simple, and that's not necessarily efficient or the best use of those resources. So step three really gets into the idea of it being a data-informed decision. We're not prisoners of the information. We give it to the principals, and we say, here is something that suggests how these resources should be allocated. However, we ask them to debate it, discuss it amongst themselves, and decide how to best use those additional resources. And so, for example, last year, we had a situation, I believe, in the middle school where we added one FTE and ultimately, even though the data would suggest it could have kind of been split 50-50, it ended up all going to one school, and that was a decision that the principals came to as how to best use that resource.
And that happened on more than one occasion, and that's where I was talking about in terms of the change and shift in terms of a systemic thinking, where colleagues are now saying, you know what, yeah, it's supposed to be mine, but I know the compelling case that you have there that I think it needs to go there for now. And that happened at the middle school and happened at the elementary school as well too. And so hopefully there's some reciprocity when we go through this process again this year. Remember, so-and-so gave so-and-so an allocation, and we can do that. I'd also add that you had presentations here from our ELL director and our special ed director. They've also developed formulas for distribution for their specialty teachers in the schools. And so they're now doing that, and we're in the process of trying to balance that, because in the first year they had to kind of do it, but they didn't have the resources, and they've shifted some staff around, and then this year they'll do it again and eventually get to a point where we're balancing. You'll see that reflected in the budget proposal as well too, in terms of a need that we have to kind of try to balance things out. I guess that brings up to this slide. One of the things that we promised we would do it every year, we would actually look at how can we recapture savings. So we do an analysis, and Nate, all year long, as we're going through the budget process, and you heard from the auditor that we do a much better job of containing our limits within each budget silo, right? So that's a first step. But then also looking at areas where we can recapture dollars to put back into the pot. And there's a couple of examples of things that we had put into the budget from last year that we've looked at and said, oh, we don't need to utilize those funds, and we can pull those out and reallocate it. And there are a number of things below the investments we would maintain were things that we had initially put in last year, and we said, okay, these are one-time items that we're going to kind of review, and we'll see if there are things that we need to sustain. And we've already come to agreement that we do want to sustain the special ed supports that we put in last year, about 140,000 that went across special education. We started a universal training for staff around inclusive strategies conference that went really well. We want to continue that. And then some other areas around mediation services that is well needed within our district. And then academic interventionists and special educator that we added to the special ed equity formula that we felt we needed it, and we still need to sustain that. So those are areas that we're going to maintain for sure. And we've had the conversations about that, and we want to support that. So I wanted to show you that process, that we are looking every year. We know it's tight. We're going to look every year to find, even if it's only $20,000, we can use it again for something else, right? And it's been beneficial for us. So just this last year, we're going to present the investments in the strategic plan silos, and that's partly from the draw up that we did from staff in terms of the 9 strategic plan teams, and also through the principals and systems leaders in terms of having conversations and working with our directors. I think this process this year was better than last year, and next year I hope it to be even more fruitful. We lost a little bit of time between August and September in terms of conversation times, but we'll be able to implement that. And our focus is under sustainable finance and facilities around our capital planning and facilities around that. And then also one of the things that's come through from day one, even from my 100-day entry plan, I heard from the community around the opportunities for community partnerships. And that's come through every year through different consultations we had both with community members and also with staff. So we've been working really hard to try to find some viable partnerships that are going to support the work that we need to do. And so if you look under here, here's a really good example. The first one is around a makerspace pilot that we're going to implement. We had a group of teachers as well as community members apply for grants, and they got grants to work on upgrading our library. If you've been around the country looking at libraries are changing in terms of the type of spaces that are used, and not just stacks anymore. They're real learning centers. And so this group came forward. Actually, last year they came forward with a proposal, and I kind of sent them back and said, well, it really needs to be aligned with our strategic plan. It needs to have this, this, this. They went back, we did some work, engaged, got some more dollars, and we thought it was a good model of exemplary partnership that they demonstrated working with the community members as well as teachers, and also will have to provide a really good product for students. And if it works well, we'll be able to replicate that in most or all of our schools in terms of upgrading those type of facilities. The other item here is special education bus driver and aid. We have a challenge with well, in special education we need resources, period. And I would say that the Laura's ask was about $2 million of, in her perfect world, it'd be like $2 million and I could make special ed perfect. And we know that's not a reality. But there are some critical pieces that we have to address. And one area is our ability to transport students in an effective way and be able to have the proper aids that can support these students as we move forward. And we have a need to do some hiring in that area. So we put that as a need to sustain that transportation piece around that. This next one, International Students Program, been working on this one quite a bit. And this is actually a potential. This is a revenue generator, and it will generate tens of thousands, if not eventually hundreds of thousands of dollars for us that we can use. And I've been successful in having an MOU with an organization that has already established international students in other states and closely in Massachusetts. So we've had some good relations and conversation with principals who've been able to implement that. And what this will do is give us an opportunity to have students, international students, come into our schools, and we're going to focus at the high school level. And these will be different types of students that we've normally seen in Burlington. You know, I know we get the refugee and immigrant students who are outside of our country. These are students whose families usually have some assets, and they want to be here because they want to get into the American education system, right? Because it's very advantageous when they go back to their countries. And that there's an opportunity for us to get some real good funds, and also to have our students interact and to learn from them. I think one of the first steps with the partnership, we'll be able to have a camp this summer and have students come to the camp, and then we'll start the process. My hope and my dream is that eventually that we have a satellite school, Burlington School District in Beijing, that we can have there. We can have staff that can go there and work, and that'll generate revenue for us as well too. It's a real possibility because it's happening in other places, and they're very much interested in Burlington because of everything we have to offer. So we're very desirable. So looking forward to that project, and we'll keep you up to date on that. The other community partnership, many of you might have heard about it. They're calling it Lake Semester Project. Another opportunity that came from some of our community partners who said, hey, we want to engage in all the wonderful things in Burlington in terms of the Echo Center and all the opportunities that our youth have to engage in that. How can we create a course that can align with the curriculum at the high school and engage our students in doing that? They've also been proactive in coming together and finding funds outside, and gotten a lot of grants. I think probably close to about $160,000 in order to release the teachers who are working on the project. And there's some in-kind funds from us in terms of what we've committed, and also some administrative costs that'll have to. But the benefits for us are going to be excellent programming and opportunities for our students, and continued engagement with our community partners to develop this. I've shared this idea with some of my colleagues at the superintendent level, and they thought, wow, you know, how do you do that, and how do you engage in that? And we are fortunate because we do have a lot of organizations and businesses around who are interested in doing this, and some communities don't have that opportunity, so we need to take advantage of it. Want to talk capital?
Sure. So you'll see the largest item dollar-wise on this slide is about $350,000, which would be the increase in debt service associated with borrowing approximately $10 million. So this would really be the first major step in our capital improvement deferred maintenance program that we outlined, and that the voters authorized an additional $19 million for, on top of our $2 million a year for 10-year kind of standing investment. So if you remember, that total program was estimated to be about $40 million. So we're looking at potentially borrowing up to $10 million for the fiscal 19 period. That would be predominantly devoted to the all the renovations that would go on with the Edmonds cafeteria, as well as moving the preschool center or centers. You've seen the presentation with the concept of like the north-south arrangement, and we're still, again, exploring, kind of doing due diligence on the feasibility of that in terms of the building site and that sort of thing. But folks remember that. There's also some money in there to get started, to plan for the next year's work, which would then probably, IAA is kind of like the next school where the level of need based on the status of its infrastructure would suggest that we should make our kind of next big investment in working that school. So again, Marty's been working through the phasing of a lot of this, and there are a lot of challenges with that, but and some money here for replacing the aging Hunt lockers. It's a relatively small component, but it's something for the hometown venue here. So in any event, the point is that's a big number, but it costs a lot of money to borrow $10 million. Obviously, as we get closer to the time when we would actually potentially borrow, one of the things we do is determine, is it still feasible to do all this work? We're not going to borrow money and start paying interest if we can't actually spend it within the next, give or take, let's say 12 to 18 months. But it's also more efficient if we're going to do all this work to go out and bond for it and get it all done kind of at once when we can. So there's $350,000, that's the debt service. You then see that I put another line down there, outfitting for new spaces. One of the things that we encountered this past year that I didn't, that I kind of an oversight of my own budgeting last time around was we made some substantial renovations to Champlain, but we didn't actually incorporate enough money to really outfit them with the new tables and chairs and kind of the other stuff that you'd expect to find in a new space. So it's and so we were able to carve out some funds to do that, maybe not as much as we would like, but that's one of those areas where we wanted to make sure that when we have this exciting new space, people really feel like it's, it's a new space. And also that, frankly, as you know, like some of the, if you've been to some of the schools with some of the older equipment, it's not as conducive to learning and particularly moving, right? Not every class now spends the entire class in just a row of desks. And so there's needs to, have equipment that can be mobile, and when it's moved, doesn't take up a huge amount of room in the classroom stuff. So that's what this outfitting is about.
Okay, so if we did only this would be significant work for the coming year, but we've got more. The equitable climate and culture, I mean, that's an area that we definitely want to continue to improve the school climate and in all aspects. But one of the areas that have been identified by our staff is around the social, emotional, and behavioral social skills. It extends to suspensions, behaviors, and it impacts on instructional time and achievement. So that's an area that we've kind of focused on under this category to try to bolster the resources and supports in this area as well. So the multilingual liaisons that now we've got 155,000. Now this is a directive that we have to start making this change. Last year we started a little bit because of loss of federal dollars, and we know this is a critical resource for us, and we want to maintain it. So we're shifting dollars from federal funds to our own dollars in order to do that. Special education supports. I said earlier that Laura's proposal was close to like $2 million of resources, and every year we've added some, and she knows that we can't get $2 million all at once, but we want to continue to support special education and the needs there. So we've added another contribution to that as well too. We've also identified, we know that some of our social emotional challenges is at the middle school level. And I think I shared that last year based on our data and based on the feedback from our principals and those of you who have children at that age group, know that that's a challenge. So we want to continue to more social emotional support. So we're looking at social work support, and that would give us about 2 social workers to add to the complement that could really be specific and target some of the work that needs to happen at those 2 schools. Equity recruitment and hiring initiative. The board has given me a directive around in one of our policies into looking at diversifying our workforce. We need a robust plan to be really strategic, and that means we got to develop a plan and we need to resource it. And there are a number of actions that need to happen in order for that to happen. So we put a line item there to be able to resource that plan as well. Restorative practices and programming. We're a restorative practices district. We've got a number of initiatives happening. We've got some consolidation of teams and starting to prepare different plans to incorporate all aspects of our district, and that means supports and resources, and the board has had an opportunity to engage in some of those activities as well. We've been doing some restorative practice work at central office with some of our departments, and it's happening at the school level and students, and so we want to continue to support the team that's developing that and resource them appropriately. Summer school, between SOAR, middle school, some of the challenges around summer schools, we have a waiting list. A lot of students want to get into our summer schools, and we often have to turn away students. And also, I think it was last year we started providing some opportunities for special education students at the middle level, and we want to be able to continue to offer those options. And so there are some transportation challenges within that when we're offering to everyone. So we need some dollars to make sure that we can continue to develop that program as well too. Equity and diversity still remains at the core of the work that we do, and we have a new assembled team that's working on some initiatives and training for our staff, and we want to put our money where our mouths are in terms of being able to give them some financial resources so they can do the work that we're asking them to do. Building teacher substitutes, this is a piece that's come from our principals. They've talked about the challenges they have with getting supplies for classrooms. One of the challenges, we use a temporary services, Kelly Services, for substitutes. So we do pay a premium on that as well, too. We're now looking at how can we better allocate that resource in terms of getting supply teachers. Last year, we added budget for the schools. Each school has a dedicated permanent substitute. They were asking for some more because the rate that we have absences don't equate to the resource we have. So we're looking at different strategies, and we know we're gonna be able to capture some dollars by doing some things differently. But we know there's gonna be a top up in the first year trying to figure out the right balance. So we need to put some dollars in there. So principals will really appreciate to have that, because when you have 2 or 3 teachers absent and you can't cover those classes, then that's your day, right? Running around trying to figure that out, and there's not as much learning happening as possible. We've bought into this new software around talent ed and records, which is going to help us streamline some of our contracts and communication with our staff, that they can go right online and be able to get information and respond back. And this will help human resources in terms of facilitating the work they need to do. And we feel that's a well-spent investment of $10,000 to continue that software piece. Inclusive teaching and learning. So this is where it happens, and the board has talked about setting the expectations around closing the achievement gap and raising the bar. So we've put a number of items in this category for academic performance and improvement that you'll see here. So Achievement Gap Initiative, we've got a number of teams, and our teams are really excited to get going. Our plans are not fully developed yet. They've been in the past year sort of research stage in terms of really finding out what you want to do. And one of the dangers in getting out one of these initiatives is everyone gets excited that we want to do something, and you get out and you start doing things. And we're trying to hold people back from just doing that, do the analysis, figure out what we really need to do and what's going to be effective based on research and experiences and talking to other districts, and then put the plans out and be able to support our staff. We know we need first best instruction to start with all our teachers, so that means some considerable investment in training, professional development, and so we're planning for that as we move forward. Proficiency-based learning, PLP coordinator, we've tried to create a position to meet some of the mandates that we have. We have a state mandate around proficiency-based learning and also personal learning plans. And we're in the need. We currently have some of those resources based on grants that we have currently, and those grants run out this year. So this is an opportunity to look at the positions and how do we consolidate and look at the next 3 years in implementing these areas. And we're looking at adding a coordinator at the schools, at the high school level, to be able to facilitate and make sure we achieve those goals by the mandated dates that we have set. Achievement gap data analysis. This one was something that I very much wanted at the central level in terms of having a chief lead person work with our research and data team and leading the analysis and the work teams around the achievement gap. And I'm really much looking at the project management style. So it's not someone we're just going to hire into a position, but it would be like, okay, you've got a project. The project is a 3-year project, and these are the items, and that person can set out a plan and go forward. And I was really surprised the level of support we got from our administrators. And when we put that out in our conversations, and there was a lot of support, and what came back was that they need help. They need help. They need someone to help them and support them as we get into the achievement gap. And also there's some connections to ESSA, the new ESSA that comes out in terms of, so this person can help facilitate for the principals at the school level, the connection from ESSA and the achievement gap, and do a lot of that work to support them. So happy to see the level of support from our administrators that this was a resource that we needed. ELL staffing, this came collectively from our systems leaders as well as Miriam in terms of doing her analysis in terms of what our needs are, and looking at it and saying that we still need another ELL FTE to add the complement to balance out for all the schools. And then at the middle school level, the middle schools looking at their cost, their course offerings, And I know one of our schools in the past year, we've had large classes, like classes of 60 for electives, right? Mostly classes like band and music where you can actually pack. But it's quite challenging for those teachers to facilitate that, and it limits the rotational level in scheduling. So those schools have asked for the support in adding some teacher allocation to be able to facilitate the schedules and offer some other offerings for students so we can have better classes on that as well too. Jolly Phonics, I don't know if anyone here familiar with Jolly Phonics? Probably Ann might be familiar with Jolly Phonics. It's a curriculum program that supports reading and language acquisition. We've piloted in a couple schools, and our curriculum department is looking at continue to implement that in our district because they've found success with it. And so we've committed to purchase another package to identify one of our schools to continue that. A lot of conversations around pairs. How do we use pairs? What do we do with pairs? Do we need more pairs? And you heard Laura's presentation around we've got many pairs, but how we use them and the level of training we've been offering them is insufficient. So we're trying to correct that in terms of being able to actually really plan for some specific training for our pairs so they can work in coordination with our teachers and give principals with the utilization there some opportunities to add time when they need more time for pairs in different situations there. Non-instructional supervision, that comes from one of the contract agreements around we have to implement new supervision, and we want to ensure that all our schools that are a certain standard, and it's going to be some imbalance in the beginning because some schools right now, our teachers and our staff do a different level of supervision than others, and some have other numbers. So we're going to be working with our principals in creating schedules that will ensure that all the buildings have the right supervision, and we anticipate we'll probably have some minor costs in there to make it work in the first year as we figure out some of those pieces. So we want to make sure that that's successful. So we've got that Power School module. So this is one that we're actually it's really kind of a savings because we've gotten a grant for a significant portion, and as we move to more data decision making, there's a module that the curriculum department needs in order to consolidate a lot of the information and data and be able to turn it out and share it with schools and they can manipulate it, and that's a one-time cost. With the added grant that we have of $17,000. I forget the numbers, but they sold it to me on the idea when the proposal because they were saying, well, it would cost us actually like $60,000. Oh, but we got this money, and I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. So we put it out, and pretty much people supported it in terms of something that we need to do. And the last one I'll talk about is one of the things I know I talked about when I first came to Burlington. I thought this was a good city and a good system to look at dual language options. And I've been having conversations with a number of different potential partners in establishing a dual language program here in Burlington. And there are a couple of barriers, and just from experience, I know one of the things is once you offer it, it's one of those things you build it and they will come, because once we offer it, people are going to want to come, and then you have the challenge of not meeting the needs. So I'm trying to guard against that in terms of preparing. One of the biggest challenges is getting qualified teachers who have the bilingualism, both in English and if it's French, that we can make sure that we continue to build the program, because it would start off as a pilot and continue to build each year. So I've had some conversations with some of our community organizations. They're very much interested, but also with trying to form partnerships with neighboring colleges who would specifically, in their language programs, offer endorsements so we could just take them right out of the schools, out of the colleges, right to Burlington. That's the only way I can think of based on my past experience, because I know that's always a challenge. And then when I was in Ontario, we actually had a different pay scale for French immersion teachers. We had to go out and give them bonuses and stuff and sign that they couldn't leave French immersion for like 5 years because this is such a hard area to sustain once you start building the program. But I'm really excited about this opportunity. I know we've got some good community support. We've got some colleges who are interested in supporting us, and maybe we'll have some options in terms of who we work with, or we work with them all at the end of the day. But I think that's an exciting opportunity for us as we move forward.
So I realized one of the things I didn't include in this presentation is a summation of those slides. So I think roughly, if my memory serves me correctly, I've done the math. Though all those additions put us somewhere in the $1.7 to $1.8 million range of kind of new investments that would be looking at. That's going to go on top of the additional costs associated with those, kind of increasing cost pressures that we face, whether it's wages, benefits, other kind of fixed costs that we don't control. So all of those things together will generate our total estimated spending. And from that, we will then be able to kind of deduct, so to speak, the revenues that we get from a variety of sources. And in the end, what we're left with is what is known as education spending. So that's, in essence, the difference between everything you're going to spend and how much money you can raise on your own to cover that spending. That whatever's left is the money that we go to the state education fund and we say, this is how much money we need. That's obviously one of the major drivers in producing your tax rate. The more you spend, the higher your tax rate. That's the way the system works. But there are other important variables that also contribute to the tax rate calculation and that actually break the direct connection between spending and tax rates. And that's part of what makes Vermont's system unique and sometimes challenging to understand. So we have some of the information we need, but as you can see, we don't have all of it. What we do know at this point from the Agency of Education is that we're looking at an equalized pupil count of 4,099 and change. That is a decline from last year, but it's negligible. I think at the end of the day, we were at something like 4,101 equalized pupils. So it's not something that's going to drive a major change in our tax rate either way. But it is important to think about, again, that the significance of that number is that your spending per equalized pupil is used to kind of determine your, that's the measure that's used ultimately to determine what your tax rate is. And so the fact that it's not increasing means it just doesn't help us, so to speak. It's not hurting us by going down, but it's not really helping us because it's the same. So that's no real change there. The other issue the issue that we do have that we know about right now is the dollar yield. I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but that is significantly lower than it was last year, and that puts upward pressure on the tax rate. So that's something that was published in the tax department's December 1st letter. We know what that number is. That won't change. I should mention equalized pupils shouldn't really change at this point, although sometimes we get minor corrections. I wouldn't anticipate a big one, but just by way of example, the original numbers that were released showed us with a significant decline in equalized pupils, and after having some conversations and working with the Agency of Education, we identified a little challenge in how they read some of the data, and we sorted that out. So my point of that story is simply that while I don't think it will change from now, it's not impossible that it would, but in all likelihood it won't. The last item that we don't have information on yet that comes, and it typically comes late in this process, so this is not unusual, even though it's frustrating, is the common level of appraisal. And I will be reaching out to the city to see if they know what the status is, but the common level of appraisal is a measure of the degree to which Burlington's property is valued relative to fair market value. And given that we've not had any type of citywide appraisal process, that number is likely to go down, meaning that our property values for tax purposes are further from market value than they were last year. That's typical. That's what typically happens when, until you go through a process of appraising all the property. And so when that happens, that also puts upward pressure on your tax rate. So we would expect that number to not be good news, so to speak. The question really is, how bad is it? And so we don't know yet, but that's the type of information that we are waiting for to be able to provide tax rate estimates and do the scenarios where we say, you know, for the hypothetical owner of a home of this or someone who earns this much income, you know, here's what drives it.
Before we move on, I neglected to give my caution after the slides, and we were kind of really excited about what we have to offer here, especially working from 6 million down to about 1.7 million. But we know the reality is once we get the variables, we're going to have to go back, revisit those lists. So just so people know that, you know, you may see a shortened list based on what, you know, the variables we have to deal with when we come back, right? So not to take what you've seen for granted.
Does that assume no change in that, there's no, sorry. Does that assume no reductions from current, whatever we're doing currently? Status quo?
No reductions.
That is
No
entirely on
reductions in
top of
staff.
status quo?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Yeah, so you could choose to say, we're not doing anything.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. In terms of equalized pupil count, is that a 3-year rolling average still, or?
It's not a 3-year rolling average, but the formula used to generate equalized pupils looks at 2-year enrollment history. That, well, I think it looks like a 2-year enrollment history that feeds into it.
Gotcha.
Nate, are you all done with your presentation?
Almost. We're almost there.
That's
Sorry. So a couple, so next steps, again, as Yao just mentioned, we need to both finalize some of our projections on kind of the cost of doing what we're doing now, so to speak, and also refine that list of new investments. We're continuing to look through and for other opportunities within our current operations to scale back, not on kind of major things, but just like where are those opportunities to eke out $10,000 here, $20,000 there, $5,000 over here, because all of that helps, obviously, to support some of these new investments. And as we talked about, we're still waiting for not only the tax variables, but also some of the important revenue figures from the state that are related to state transportation aid, vocational support, things like that, that I think we're a little behind actually on getting, but those are other key variables. And so this is our timeline, and we've highlighted January 16th. The budget timeline that we have posted online when we started this process had a tentative date for January 16th, and we're recommending that we take the tentative nature of that and change it to a permanent date, and that folks book it, because first of all, as we noted, there are some critical pieces here that we're not able to present tonight that it doesn't, in our mind, make sense to come back on January 9th and say, here they are, and by the way, take action on it. But also because of, again, of what Commissioner Orwell and I heard and everyone's been seeing in the news about potential action out of Montpelier. I don't personally think we're likely to know definitively what that action will be by January 16th, but we will at least be better informed, and to the extent that we want to make any plans or contingencies related to that, that kind of gives us as much time as possible. Just as a reminder to folks, we can't go a whole heck of a lot later than that, because we ultimately have to submit the budget number in the official kind of ballot language format to the city for printing and production of the ballots, which starts early because, again, we've got early voting, all that sort of thing. And I should add one other thing. Actually, I think I might have my dates off by a day there if someone wants to check their calendar. I think, and I could be wrong about this, but the 9th might be the Monday. I don't know if someone has a calendar, wouldn't mind.
No, 9th is
It's a Tuesday? Okay, so then it's the 8th okay, good. We got that right. But what's not on here is the 8th is when we have scheduled to go to the city council and give them a kind of update on our process as we are required to do by law. And I will acknowledge, for those who sometimes bring it up, it's not the city council's opportunity to approve or disapprove of the budget. It's just a kind of sharing process, but it is something that we're required to do. In the past, we have had the board chair there. And certainly, you could be there, but usually we just give a short presentation. They have some questions. There's a public comment opportunity. So, it doesn't hurt, but we don't need everyone to kind of be part of the presentation.
going with this budget to the city council? Because there's no time in between there.
Yes, I mean, we're not, right, we wouldn't expect to kind of we wouldn't expect to present any significant change to this for the first time to the council and not have the board have seen it.
And that was-
Okay,
so-
I
so
get
Kathy, that was the right answer, right?
Yeah.
So that's not to say that we're not gonna have extra meetings. Now, this is the meetings we're looking at right now.
Just- yeah.
If as this information comes in, there's a big impact that we're looking at, we could easily call, probably not something the week between Christmas and New Year's, because people are traveling and stuff, but I would be prepared for
I
maybe
don't think
this.
that's gonna happen, because I'm pretty sure those variables will come in. That's the 9th. We will definitely have some updated information.
But be
right?
prepared
So
for
if I-
additional meetings
Yeah.
beyond this. Between now and the 16th, I would anticipate another meeting or two besides the 9th, if we have to get together, yeah.
So the week after New Year's.
The week after New Year's is a very good, like the 2nd and the 4th, or something like that. If needed, just have that kind of holding thing in your mind that,
Yeah, I don't know if we'll have enough developments by then, just given the holiday period to make, I mean, it's probably worthwhile just thinking about it, but I think that, in all likelihood, we'd be looking at being able to answer a lot of the still open questions on the 9th. That's kind of how I would anticipate anyway.
we open for questions now? I'm sorry. So, more questions? Mr. Commissioner Barlow.
I had a comment and a question, I guess. I'll do my question first. There was money in the budget, $7,000 for an international student program, $6,000 for a lake semester project, and another $7,000 for a dual language exploration partnership. That's not a lot of money, and so what is that money for? Specifically, is it for?
Wanna do one at a time?
Well, I mean, they're about the same amount, so I'm guessing they're sort of just to do the work.
Just
to-
administrative kind of stuff, to do travel and that kind of stuff, just
Just to get the
facilitate
programs launched,
programs
but not
launched, yeah.
actually implement
Like,
any
for
of the
instance, I'll
programs.
give you an example, the international program already looked at a plan from the SPAR, which is a company we're working with, and they have a plan that they're gonna invest $20,000 already for summer school, to do a summer camp, right? We may need to, add 1,000 here to help, but they're paying for most of it. So we wanna make sure we have budget to ensure that those things happen, even though they're gonna be putting forth the cost for the majority of the pieces.
Oh, I was just, in brief, another example with the Lake Semester project. That whole initiative doesn't just cost $6,000 or $7,000. There's a lot of work that's done by the kind of project team that's leading that, the community team. But in addition to what you see up there in terms of, we'll be making, in essence, an in-kind investment of high school staff who will be the teachers for that program. So that doesn't show up as kind of a, we could have, I guess, kind of illustrated that in a different way, but there's an example of a significant investment in that, but it's coming from our existing staff. It's not kind of a new dollars into the system, but it is a kind of supportive investment.
I just had one other comment that I just wanted to make while I still had the floor. I just wanted to note that in the equitable climate and culture spending that you outlined, $245,000 was for non-educational expenditures. $155,000 was for multilingual liaisons, and $90,000 was for social workers. And I think that that's important to note because we continue to have an increasing amount of non-educational expenses in our school budgets. So that's just my soapbox comment.
I just wanted to ask about the French program. That also didn't have very much in it. And it's going to be hard to find a bunch of teachers. I mean, I guess I
That was
can't
just
even
planning.
figure.
That was just planning.
That's just
Oh, that's just planning.
implemented. No, I wish it was that much implemented. No.
Oh.
No, that's just planning.
I was going to say, and when you say it's going to be started, is it just in one school and the whole school will be French, English, or
Well,
is?
that's what we have to work out with the plan. Most successful programs I've seen, the way they've worked, you've identified, let's say, one school, and you can start with 2 classes, so you can have partnerships between the 2 teachers, and you start at a very primary grade, so let's say grade 1, and then next year now you have a grade 1 class and a grade 2 class, and they move up. And that's why I say you need to continue to add teachers, right? Because it's going to go from grade 2. Now, so over a course of 5 years, now you've got an elementary school that has a dual program, right, from grade 1 to 5. So that's how you would build it up. So we just have to be cautious around doing the legwork behind to really project what we can handle, because I know once we put it out there, people are going to say, we want, then you have the challenge of, okay, how do we keep people out? And you have lotteries and who wants to go in and who doesn't, all the, so we're trying to be cautious around the conversations and building something that we're going to be able to sustain successfully as we go forward.
And Kathy, you're familiar with this coalition that's pushing for this?
For what?
There's a whole community group that's pushing for the French immersion, for the bilingual, yeah, so that,
I mean, I've heard that there is,
Yeah.
that there are people interested in it, but I also know immersion classes. My niece and nephew went to a German one in St. Louis, so I know the thing. It's just,
And so that money is for the exploration, right? So you will see it in September, class start open, we're gonna start the process.
anybody over here have a question? Commissioner Curry? Do not have 30 questions.
Well, how should I do this?
Just do
30
two good
questions.
ones.
Just two at a time?
Two at a time.
And then can I come back
You
and
sure
do my
can.
two more?
Yes, you
And then
can.
my two more? and then my
Absolutely.
two- okay. Thanks. Okay, so, sorry, I just had to find my
Find the best, what are you going
place.
down pages of questions?
Well, I just had to find where I started. Okay. Okay. So the equity index, starting there, thank you for explaining that. And so you were saying that there's kind of this additional resources that is like a pool, and then it's like a Shark Tank, right? So do the principals just like take the data and review it, or do they actually get together and make presentations to each other to share that kind of contextual
Yes.
information?
So the process that we went through, we presented the formula. It actually took us, well, last year we did 3 or 4 meetings actually, to make sure we had the data right? And we put each school and their numbers, and then we had a generator. So we said, okay, we've got 4 staff to put in the equity index. So that goes in at the end, right? And so how does it get distributed? It gets distributed to this school, and this school. What does that look like? Then they start having the conversation, okay, well, that makes sense, well, that doesn't make sense, that's right. And so that's where we had the conversations, both at the middle and the elementary last year. Individual principals said, you know what, I'm getting this, but based on our conversations, they need it the most at this time, so I'm gonna give my portion of the allocation to that school. But it created a systemic process, whereas what we had before was just the lobbying, right? I really need, and then someone's got to make a decision who has the most need. So we used the data based on, because it was interesting when we did pull the data, that people didn't have to state their case. It was there. It's like, okay, well, SA has severe needs. We know that. The number says that, right? So it was there. So that eliminated that. And just talked about how we're going to do the allocation around that, and that was really helpful to do that.
Do you just present to them like a pot of money, or do you say it's for this purpose?
Yeah, well, that part is the core teacher allocation.
Okay.
So that was the core teacher
It's the core
allocation.
teacher
Core teacher allocation, yeah.
But with respect to the rest of the budget, how does
So
the?
like for like kind of what we call their supplies budget, that's a
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
simple term, but it's
Right.
like
Everything.
almost all of their non-personnel
Right,
budgets. We use a similar kind of process, and in that case, it's the allocation is based on any, but what they choose to do with it is up to the principals, in essence. So some principals,
Okay.
or on a given year, might end up with, needs based on what's coming forward. They need more art supplies, more library supply, whatever it might be.
Okay.
That we don't really, we just let
Because I
them.
was at a PTO meeting, and the librarian gave a presentation about how badly the library needed resources. And so I was kind of like, well, isn't that the principal's decision, right?
Yeah.
When it comes down to
That's
it,
one of the
or-
things, the principals get to make those decisions. They
Okay.
work with their staff and say, okay,
Yeah.
what do we need? And sometimes I know you guys get proposals from teachers saying, we need more tech stuff or this, and we're like, well,
That's the principal's
got
decision.
this, they've got a pile of money, if they've got, I don't know, let's say $20,000.
Yeah.
They're determining how they're gonna use it.
Yeah.
That year. When I was a principal, we'd go through the process where we would have a staff committee, and we would look at, okay, what's our needs? And last year, art got X amount, and, tech really needs to get, so let's do that. And, we need to get those lockers or whatever fixed, so let's wait till the next year, and then we'll make sure, and that's the kind of conversation. We're just now starting to have that, those kind of level of conversation from our level down to the principals, and letting the principals know that, yes, you are in control of those dollars, and you have some flexibility around how to allocate that.
So just so I'm clear, you look at the equity data, and then do you distribute, like allocate budgets based on that to the principals, and then they have the opportunity, can they create staff committees?
They can
At
do
their
that.
discretion, or
Absolutely.
do they have to?
I haven't given the directive that they
You-
have to, I've just suggested that, hey, this
That's
is.
at the
this is
principal's discretion to create a staff committee
Right.
to do the budgeting.
the
And then either let the staff have the conversation, or they can make the decision. It's
Right.
not, you're not dictating that.
No.
Okay,
We're doing
thank
the
you.
systemic piece, like, here's how much you got.
Here's how
and
much you
everything
get based on equity index. Thank you.
Another
Okay.
thing,
Let me get to Stephanie.
The other thing I'll just say, because since you asked about that, one of the things that we've introduced in the last year is around, especially the supplies piece, because we're using the variables around numbers, right? And enrollment. Enrollment changes from June to September.
Right.
Right, so we said,
course.
okay, you're gonna get this amount of money, right? And then we'll do a recount in October, and then Nate sends the money afterwards, right? Now, people say, hey, that sounds great, but there's a plus and minus to that,
Right.
right? Because you could lose
Sure.
10 kids over the summer.
I
So
don't like
then
it. It's more work for me.
It's more work for him,
the principals
right?
demanded it, so.
So, but
Okay.
then we're
So
really
there's a
doing
true-up.
budget based on your needs,
Right.
right? So it's not just, okay, we're setting the budget in March, and people say, well, I think I'm gonna get 20 kids because I heard from so-and-so. Okay, you heard that, we'll see what happens once you have all your enrollment in September, and then you make that adjustment.
So we
right?
just recently did that, and we'd withheld, a couple $1,000s on average, so that when we did this reallocation, everybody got more money, but some people got more than kind of the average amount, and some people got less than that, but at least everybody came out in the positive, so there's that.
Yeah, two questions. So I was very interested in the position for the data position for the achievement gap. Is that replacing, in essence, replacing Dana Barron, who's leaving? Is this a new position?
No, it'll be a new position.
Okay.
So we have an opportunity here. Dana is leaving,
Uh-huh.
and initially I thought of marrying the position and expanding the Dana's position, but the Achievement Gap team, the principals, came up with a proposal and said, this is what we need, because they had, this came out of a presentation around ESSA and their needs around that, and they said, we really need somebody outside of that also to make the connections and the link to that. And so I said, oh, sounds like a good plan. And that's gonna, so I said, you're gonna give me the results I need if you get that. And so they're saying that's what we need. So we'll be able to have, we'll be creating a department that'll be sort of focused on the achievement gap and the data with Dana's position, and we've got another person in there, Roger, who does, and then this person will be supporting that and supporting the principals as well too. And what I hope to be able to get out of that is that we'll have individuals that are focused on our data 24/7. So when we do need to answer some questions, like they're outside of, we want to know exactly what our teacher ratio is, by the way, they're already planning and doing that work. We don't have to, right now, when I get that question, we got to go back and try to figure it out and do the analysis and look at the AOE data. And by the time we get it done, whoever's asking the question, it's far too late. But now we'll be able to see that ahead of time and start churning out different data pieces. Also, the principals want data reports in order to inform their decisions, right, on a number of levels, from suspensions to the different initiatives they put in there. And they're asking for people who have expertise with using the Power School and creating reports and doing analysis. That saves them time in terms of being able to be presented and say, hey, this is what it is, but also having someone who's doing that as not just statistician, but as an educator. So they can say, hey, you could use these strategies, or we'll work with the curriculum department and we'll come in and support. And so that's the kind of structure we're trying to develop in order to support our school
Can I
development.
follow up with you?
Sure.
So that was part of my question. This person is therefore going to have an education background, not just data. And so am I correct in assuming, from what I have learned about the districts that are really making progress on the achievement gap, is that they have this data at the school level so they can really fine tune where kids are struggling and how to put supports in place for them in kind of real time, rather than waiting 6 months or a year. So
Right.
literally on a weekly or monthly basis,
Absolutely.
you can track these kids.
Absolutely.
Is that the
That is exactly,
intention?
I mean, and we've got a mandate around personal learning plans that we're working on that we haven't been able to fully implement yet, and we don't have to yet, but that will also support that. The strategy you're talking about, I know in my district, we called it cycles, and our teachers were trained and facilitated, and they did 6 weeks assessments. So every 6 weeks, there was an assessment, and they knew, so it was assessment for learning, so they knew, okay, you know what, Nate, we need to work on this. So we could see progress, almost on a monthly basis in terms of tracking the information. So we want that level of instructional supports, so we can actually see some of the gains. That's the only way we're going to be able to make those gains for all our students.
Just, can you just, quick, it was my second question. Trauma training, is that part of what you're doing next year as well?
Yes.
With NFI?
Yes.
That's continuing,
That's
okay.
already, yeah, it's continuing, yeah. There are things that are not on the budget, but we're doing them,
Got
we're
it.
still doing them, right? So-
So, well, you gave the example of the 2 middle schools, so I'll go there on your, if there are 60-40 difference in them, and it is about that because of the poverty levels in those 2 schools. If you're giving 60 to one school and 40 to the other, you're just keeping them the same, and we're not changing. The resources are going proportional to the poverty, I get that, but we're not changing the makeup of those schools. And so it is continuously inequitable, the number of students, because we're never going to be able, in this cycle and in 2 or 3 years down, to put enough staff in to make Hunt be equal to Edmonds as far as putting enough staff in to take care of the kids in poverty, ESL, and IEPs, because there is such a huge difference between the two. So even though that sounds equitable, and it is equitable how you're putting out the dollars, in the end, it's not going to change the inequity of those 2 schools, and that's what bothers me more. I get what you're saying about putting in the money, but it seems to me that we have to be working on changing the
demographics.
numbers of kids or how those 2 schools are made up. And that's the same with many of our grade schools too when I look at it. I mean, if I look at IAA, it is almost back up to where it was when we made it a what do you call it, school, magnet school. And yet we have other schools that have extremely low numbers of kids in poverty. And I just think that until we as a district are able to really look at all of our schools and be able to change them around so that there are not such inequities. I just saw a film, a documentary on the resegregation of our public schools in our large cities across the country. And it scares me to death that we here in Burlington are kind of on a way going down that road. And I just want us to nip it in the bud and try to change this before it gets to the point where we look like New York and some of those other states that have truly segregated schools. And ours may be only by poverty and not so much by race, but it all works the same for the education of the kids.
Do you have a recommendation?
I won't belabor this, but just quickly. First of all, I do believe those kids can learn as well, too. In terms
You
of-
believe what?
I believe those kids can learn, those.
I'm not saying they can't learn, but they have a lot harder time.
Yeah, I believe that they can still achieve regardless. But at the same time, if you remember a couple of months ago, we made a change in our transportation so we can start making sure that we can have opportunities for the allocation of the middle schools and the 2 middle schools, so we can have a balance as you're talking about. We did that a few months ago in terms of doing that, and we have staff who are looking at that. We can't go back, and we're not going to take kids out of the school, but as moving forward, we're going to start to be judicious around how we sort of allocate students at the different schools to give that better balance.
I just want to add one thing. I'll be brief, which is just in terms of, okay, well, if I may, with leave of the chair, I do think it's important that we're mindful of the language that we use, and while it's true that we have schools that have relatively different levels of poverty, none of our schools would meet my definition of extremely low poverty in this district. When we're talking about the kind of best case scenario, so to speak, of being schools where a third of the enrollment qualifies for free and reduced lunch. I don't think, so I know that wasn't kind of your intent. I just think that when we speak to a broader audience that could be listening to us, we should be mindful of the fact that I don't think any of our schools are what would meet my personal definition of low poverty, which would be a lot less than that.
Well, 36% to 90%
Right, relatively speaking, there's a difference.
is a huge difference, but, okay.
Have you had conversations, Nate, with the city around the common level of appraisal? I just know that they've recently done some like class-wide reappraisals for rental properties, and that in theory would help us, but.
Yeah, it doesn't help. What will help, what happens in the law, I believe, there's a trigger when you get down below essentially 80% of fair market value. You have to go through the process of reappraising, but even that doesn't, I mean, in a community our size, doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So it's like, even when we hit that trigger, we're probably still going to be into a couple more years of kind of this level ticking down until that happens. I don't know. I don't think we'll hit that trigger this year, but I really don't know. It's not an area of expertise. I just kind of wait and see what the numbers look like. So.
Yeah. I previously served on the Board of Tax Appeals, so it's like 83%, I think, last time I was there.
Yeah, we're less than that now. I think we're like 82 or maybe.
And then is there, and this might be ignorance on my part, so, but at some point, will we be able to get like a budget document of numbers and like our, with like an Excel spreadsheet? I don't know how it works, how you do it, but.
Right, yeah, so one of the things we did last and install on our budget website is produce a big comprehensive budget document that contained both a discussion of everything that was in the proposed budget and some data information, but also, Jen, just like kind of pages and pages of those numbers with a couple shorter summary charts. So that we intend to produce that again. That seemed to be something that the community really was seeking when we didn't have it, and so that is something that we intend to put forward once we get through and kind of know
further down the road.
Right, further once we know what our budget is, and we can.
Pretty sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Porter. Just a quick question. When you put the sort of like 1.0 FTE and then you put a number like 90 or 100 or 50 or 25, whatever it is, does that include salary and benefits or just? Okay, yes.
Yeah, it's intended to cover salary and benefits. Obviously, you never know, and you're not allowed to ask someone during a hiring process, like, so do you have a family? Are you going to be on health insurance? But we kind of do a ballpark estimate, and we presume that over the course of just also natural turnover that is going to happen, that hopefully it'll kind of even out in the end and end up around those numbers.
Thank you.
You else have anything? I have a question. I'm sorry, Commissioner Harrington.
I have a small question and a slightly bigger question. The small question is $75,000 on the special education bus. Is that for like adding another bus and driver, or so?
The driver and
adding
the aide.
a driver and an aide, in addition to whatever we already have.
Yes.
And then secondly, I'm wondering, maybe this is not a question so much as a wish, whether on, because I'm wondering if you can help us think about what difference some of these things would make for students. So for example, on the, and I'm specifically wondering what difference this budget proposal would make for elementary schools, because we've heard from a fair number of parents over time talking about elementary school issues, and many of the things that you highlighted here seem to have to do with the high school or emotional supports in the middle school. So I'm wanting to understand just how are we imagining this budget having an impact in the elementary schools? And for something like the achievement data coordinator, Commissioner Sabino's question brought a little bit of insight into what that position would be like, but I think it can be useful to craft a kind of narrative snapshot of if we had that position, here's what it would make possible for an illustrative teacher and classroom or combo. I mean, because some of those kinds of things can sound like, why are we putting more money into that instead of hiring another math coach or whatever? Like, so to sort of except I do understand that level of like middle management implementation often makes an enormous, which is the kind of job I have in my day job. It makes a big difference in supporting people to do things differently in the classroom. And if you if you simply announce a priority and expect many people to implement that priority in very decentralized ways, it can often fail for lack of that kind of slightly higher than the classroom level support. But at the same time, if we don't tell a story about that, it's hard to understand how that goes. So I guess it's it's more a wish than a question.
No, that's good. We debated over how much detail, because we could talk about each item.
Of course, yes.
But one of the things we will do in the next iteration is the request, 6 million, we'll do a little check. Because I think we've hit a lot of what people were asking for. So that you'll be able to see some of the things embedded in there when we frame it up that way. But yeah, we could spend hours actually if we wanted to go into detail on some of these pieces, but those are good things to think about. Elementary, yes. So I've noted that, so we'll,
Nate, can you ballpark for me the dollar value of the loss of federal funding and grants for fiscal year 19 that we're going to be working on, and then accumulative for the last 3 years since you've been here?
Well,
Just since you've been
not
here.
easily, but I will say for 19, one of the challenges is we don't get a lot of those award allocations until much later in this process, meaning this spring if we're lucky. And sometimes that's because the state gives us an estimate and they don't even know the answer from the feds. So I don't know what we will face in that respect, and the kind
Can
of.
you look backwards and just say over the last couple of years, this is what we've lost?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, no, I don't, I'm sorry, I can't.
You sure can.
But I think,
sure
I think I guess I would say that we have over time had a pullback at the federal level, but I don't think that in and of itself tells the whole story either. One of the other challenges, and we illustrated it here tonight, is that the ability to use those funds in the way that we would choose to use them is being reduced. So, for example, one of our biggest new proposed investments is in the multilingual liaisons. Regrettably, that's not a bunch of new staff to do that important work. That is the general fund picking up costs because we're no longer permitted to use the federal funds to the degree, to support those folks to the degree that we have been. So we will still have some of those federal funds left over to use for other things to the extent that we can, although there's a lot of strings and it's a challenge sometimes to do that for something that's going to be really impactful. But I think that in some ways is as much of a challenge going forward as just when we lose out on those funds. And I should also just add, in addition to challenges around federal funds, one of the other things we talked about there was the proficiency based learning position and PLP coordinator position at the high school. That again is, we didn't show that as like a new position. There's existing staff doing that important work, but that work was supported with a grant from the Nellie Mae, and that is ending now. And so we had to choose, do we stop doing that work or do we start paying for it with our general fund? And in the case of those roles, after consultation with the high school principal, she made a compelling case that work is really important. And so that's another example where we didn't kind of put like, oh, this is a new staff position, but it will be kind of new to the general fund in that sense. So that's an example. It's not federal funds also, but it's important to remember we have a bunch of other sources like that are not permanent.
I had one more question. I do have one more question. Superintendent, one of the things you asked for input from us on operations and stuff like that, and one of the things I had down there was I would like us to consider increased funding to support a much more aggressive drive on employment diversity. I think I used the word blitz, right? So Nikki's been saying this for a couple of years. I've heard her say, we need to go get them. Teachers of color, teachers of diverse backgrounds, whatever it might be. The 100-mile radius to us is not the place to look. So I'm wondering if there was any way that was still being considered for fiscal year 19 to really jumpstart. Oh, did I? I didn't see it.
It's 40,000.
Oh,
Yeah.
what was the?
So
Why'd you let me go through all that? Thanks. You could've let me-
You're covered.
So what was it called?
it's called equity hiring,
Recruitment.
recruitment, yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't even count as a question then.
That's an affirmation.
Yeah. All right, never mind. I'll put you on there. Thank you very much. Thanks.
So,
Commissioner Curry.
sorry, just because I like to have the last word. So I'll throw these out and then I can send them to you, so you don't have to answer them. But my questions, or if there's something that other people want to hear, my questions are that makerspace and library thing, is that aligned with tech ed or is that totally separate? And then related to that was Bob Church brought up some good information about Perkins funding and tech ed. And so I just wanted to understand a little more about I think there was a concept that could we actually, because of the restrictions on Perkins, could we actually do away with Perkins and make some trade-off, I think. If I don't have that right, just ignore it. Can teachers take classes in the summer and then use the training that they got in the summer in their classroom without any alignment with the other teachers in the same grade? Like, can 3 second-grade teachers in 3 different schools go take classes in the summer and come back and be like, oh, I just learned this great new thing, can I just do it in my classroom? Is that a thing? That does happen. That's what I thought. And so I would be interested in understanding, whether, I understand our contract language dictates that, but do you see professional development opportunities to mitigate that in order to measure, how do we know students, the achievement gap is closing if 3 or 4 teachers are doing 3 or 4 different things because they just thought it was really interesting and they wanted to try it. So that's kind of like a achievement gap thing, and is there anything to budget for to mitigate that?
Yeah,
Or
well,
not?
I think there's 2 things. I think the previous contract, we put some language in there that we wanted them to take courses that align with our goals, because you're right, people were taking things that sometimes served their own needs but didn't serve the needs. But we also are planning in terms of our professional development that we're offering. They're going to be very specific around instructional improvements to
Okay.
close the gap. And
Okay.
I think I talked about first best instruction,
Yeah.
looking at all teachers in terms of what level of instruction and provide them with the high yield strategies that we know are going to be effective
Okay.
and have school.
And so can we just footnote that to make those the metrics for our policies, our achievement gap policy, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I just want to tie the budget, what we're
To-
budgeting for, to the purpose of the money with the metrics that will measure if we're being successful.
Right.
You know what I mean? Thank you. And then,
Last one, then we gotta move on.
so the costs we're seeing being added, like Jeff mentioned, this 2 salaries at $70,000, because $35,000 each. Is that the full cost of the item, or is it just the new additional costs being added to the general fund, and maybe there's some other funds already in the general fund baseline that are paying for like some of the costs of that line item, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and it's kind of, yeah, it depends.
Okay.
In some cases, it's completely
Okay,
additional. In some cases, we might have other funding within the
There
budget
was
that we
some
can use
baseline.
to support, like, for example, with the lake semester or something like that. You know,
and then there's
other
this,
elements.
just the new additional. The question for Ryan, so it's a freebie. I would, it seems to me the city's going through the same budget process, and we had a conversation with the legislature about the fact that, the feedback I got from the Senate Pro Tem, Tim Ash, was that he thought that defining educational expense in Act 60 or 68 was an opportunity, because it is not defined. And so we have been told we can't use funds for things that we think we can because of direct educational expense. So he thinks that's an opportunity. So that's something to follow up on. And so because of that, where are we with the city in our conversations about pilot funding, given that they're also budgeting right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've started that conversation, both the superintendent and I have sort of introduced that conversation. I think there's reticence to do anything. Their position is fairly conservative in terms of their estimation on some things like we've proposed in the past, multilingual liaisons. There's been an openness to something else. I think Yao talked a little bit about the summer school programs,
Yeah,
which is
that's what I was
something
gonna
that
ask
they've
about.
helped
Can we-
in the past, and so something that is clearly outside of the bounds of educational spending as it's been defined now by our agency of education. They are open to talking about, and I've had a commitment that they take it seriously. So we need to figure out what, I think as a group, what that specifically looks like. But there's an avenue to maybe recoup some of that. That's my understanding, so.
So thanks for that. So when I had my conversation with the mayor, he was open to re-engage with board members again to talk about opportunities around there. I think they were still struggling with the definition around some of those pieces, but he was open to have another conversation around that. And I was also say that they recently gave dollars to our parent university and supported sort of a portion of that. So there are $4,000.
$4,000. Foot in the door.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's symbolic in terms of
Yes.
looking for items that meet the criteria, right? In terms of
current lack of criteria.
Right. current
Thank
lack
you.
of-
Commissioner Barlow, and I'm going to call it this one,
Yeah.
only because I would ask that everybody get a chance to go through it and build those questions and really send them in, because that builds the FAQ on the website.
I just wanted to build on Commissioner Curry's comments around perhaps trying to get more precision around what is education spending and what is not education, or spending on, educational endeavors and what is not. And we should, if we understand those things those services that we're delivering, because we're the provider of last resort and they aren't necessarily educational in nature, and we can get that defined somehow, there may be a legislative opportunity, maybe in the coming session or maybe in a future session, to get more precision around that language so we could have the money from other sources, perhaps pilot city funding that's granted to us by city charter, and then we would be able to use that money without having to get line item by line item permission or acceptance from the city in order to use that money. So I think there's an opportunity there for us, albeit maybe a longer term one.
So I'm going to, you guys can have a conversation after, if you don't mind, just so I put this close. All right, so I'm going to, Nate, I'm going to close out your budget presentation. Okay? Thank you very much. We will now move on to we're going to move on to two agenda items, which are now known as items 6 and 7. The first one will be a review and agreement on the fiscal year 18 superintendent goals. I think we've reviewed them a couple of times, and I sent them to you again, right? You didn't get them in your email?
me.
Oh, okay. And then following that, we'll do a review and agreement on the fiscal year 19 goals. And I think everybody knows that those kind of flow together, right? So and one of, they're funded in the budget. So, we're going to own some of the success of these goals because we funded them and we're agreeing that these are the things that is what we're looking for. So, anyways, unfortunately, this was added to it, but we've all seen this. I don't have a way of.
I just sent it to Jeff, and you can look at mine. Thanks, Ann.
I'll read, these are the fiscal year 18 goals that I'm going to review right now. The first one is to develop a robust employment diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring plan to increase the representation of teachers of color in the Burlington School District with measurable goals. Okay? So it's to develop the plan to increase the representation of teachers of color in the district with measurable goals. And that was number 1 for fiscal year 18. Fiscal year 18, the second one is to develop and begin implementing a plan detailing actions to improve and promote a positive work culture and climate in each school building and in central office in support of central and school-based administrators and their staff. This plan should include a mechanism for measuring the progress. Again, so giving us the plan and the metrics to measure the success of the plan.
You added that on, that last sentence.
I just added that on myself. I'm ad-libbing on the
Ad-libbing,
explanation of
okay.
it. Okay. Any further discussion on fiscal year 18 goals? And you've reviewed these, right? Okay, the plan, okay. Any discussion on the fiscal year 18 goals? Commissioner Harrington?
So the intent on both plans is that they should include.
It's hard to hear you.
So the intent with the language around both plans is that they should include a proposal to measure progress and success. Can I suggest that in the final wording of it, we use the same phrasing on both? Because in the current draft of the first goal, it's unclear whether that's the plan or the teachers who are supposed to have goals. It was the wording you used was more clear on the second goal than the first.
We can. Easy enough to do. So actually, the same last sentence.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just give me 1 second, please.
Actually, I have a second question. I thought we already had a diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring plan or hiring strategies.
We did before Yao got here.
And so did that just, what's the status of the thing that existed before?
There was actually no plan. There was no plan. There was development of hiring processes, but there wasn't a comprehensive plan that was written and assessed.
So what I was referring to is the former superintendent presented a plan to the Diversity and Equity Committee, and that's what existed.
Okay.
I saw another hand come up. Did I see another hand? Commissioner Wick.
And just so I'm clear, and maybe even, not that there are many members of the public here, but these are goals that tie into the performance pay aspect of the superintendent's contract? Is that the idea?
It's the other way around. Performance pay aspect of the superintendent's contract tie into these goals.
Meaning, like in plain English, what's,
Plain English is the success success or degree of success of these goals will gauge the school board's award of the performance, what do we call it, performance pay? Performance pay opportunity, yes.
and these aren't the only goals he has, clearly, because he's got a lot on his plate. But these are the ones that you want to give special emphasis to, is that the idea?
That's correct.
Thank you.
this time around. Hopefully, we don't have to address these next time around.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other discussion on the fiscal year 18 goals? Commissioner McLaren?
I think I've mentioned this in the past, and will restate it, just because I don't think there's a way to plan or measure school climate without a comprehensive climate survey, and it's something I have a keen interest in seeing community-wide, in the future. But that's I know we don't want to be made too prescriptive in these goals necessarily.
Community-wide or school-wide, district-wide?
I think it needs to be
Not the whole city.
states, I think it should cover all our stakeholders, but that's my opinion, so.
Anything else? Commissioner Seguino?
Just to say that there is a climate survey being prepared.
Yeah.
Which is part of the MOU with UVM. So it would seem to me that we're in the position to do that.
Great.
But I should defer to the superintendent on that, that's my understanding.
Yes, there is a survey being prepared.
Okay.
in partnership with
Okay.
UVM.
Okay, great.
Before I take, I don't want to take a motion now, but if you certainly have another question, go right ahead. I didn't know if you were going to make a motion, that's why I
No,
jumped.
I couldn't hear Stephanie about the climate survey.
Oh,
And I was curious about it, because I think it's a great idea.
Yeah,
There's a
it's-
climate survey in works that part of our strategic action was to do that regardless. So that'll sort of support the direction of the board in wanting to measure climate as we move forward.
Item 1 has been changed. The first goal for fiscal year 18 has been changed to develop a robust employment diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring plan to increase the representation of teachers of color in the Burlington School District. This plan should include a mechanism for measuring progress. All right, so that was just on the advice. So that's how it reads now. Okay? Can I take a motion? Would somebody like to make a motion?
So moved.
Did you,
I can get this to you. Promise. Get it to you. Commissioner Curry, can I have a second? Commissioner Seguino, all those in favor of the fiscal year 18 superintendent performance goals, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those against? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the fiscal year 19 goals, which are much more robust. The first one we had, and keeping in mind that these feed off directly off the fiscal year 18 goals, okay? The first one is demonstrate significant progress towards implementing the employment diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring plan outlined in fiscal year 18. What's the matter, Kath?
So the first, all that's going on is making the plan.
That's correct.
And the second year is implementing.
That's correct.
Okay.
Number 2 is make measurable progress on improving district climate based on the plan you developed in fiscal year 18. Just as a note, both of these have funding within the FY19 budget. Okay? Which has always been a problem that we've never had that link before, and now we do, right? Question on, I'm going to read number 1 again, then we can discuss it. Demonstrate significant progress towards implementing the employment diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring plan outlined in fiscal year 18. Discussion? Commissioner Wick?
I mean, I just wonder if it's premature to set FY19 at this time.
Any other discussion? All right. On the second one, make measurable progress on improving district climate.
There's a hand.
Commissioner Harrington?
So, the fiscal year is the graduation year, so.
Yes.
This is essentially the performance pay goals that go along with the budget.
My
that we are-
apologies.
That we are.
Yeah, no, outlined in fiscal year 18, yeah.
So but these are the performance goals that go along with the year that's envisioned by the budget that's currently under development.
Yes.
I generally like the idea of considering potential performance goals at the same time as mapping the budget that envisions this year, because it seems like we're doing a bunch of envisioning work all at the same time. So I would say it's a fine time to do that. The time.
I really like to hear what you have to
Okay.
say. It's very important.
Okay, Commissioner Wick is raising the question, why are we doing this now? I'm saying I like doing performance pay goals now because it goes along with the budget, which is the other time when we are envisioning what would we like to see happen. And these are two different mechanisms about a board envisioning what we hope will happen over the course of the next academic year. And will be the task of the board in the future to determine what are the consequences about these. It's the decision about how the performance pay works out is not being made now. It's just what the potential metric is. I'm just wondering why we don't want to name something about closing the achievement gap rather than implementing the hiring plan. And as you probably know by now, I sometimes think while talking, so it's an honest wonder. I like the second. I'm totally sold on the second goal. On the first one, I'm now just thinking out loud. Why are we not naming achievement? And maybe it's because there's a lot more about success in school than just test scores.
Commissioner Curry?
I was just going to respond to again, keeping the focus on an area that I guess I would personally say I would want to elevate. In other words, I think that the superintendent has structured in budget solutions for implementing strategies that close the achievement gap, but for this one. And so I guess it's kind of the way that I, as a board member, would want to signal that we need to bring some focus to this area.
Let me just mention something, because I think an important thing to remember is that these are for a snapshot of time of 1 year.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't think we've seen a measurable achievement gap progress in 3 years. And I don't think the district has seen it in 20. So I think it's fair to say that although we do absolutely capture that under very specific funding, and we all realize this issue, can't legislate poverty, can't legislate so many things, and we can just absolutely try to make a difference for these kids. Well, I'm preaching to the choir. I don't mean to do that. I apologize. But anyways, that's a much longer term. It's hard. You can't put that into a fiscal year goal with any confidence in the number that, yes, that equates to it or not, when so many others have tried. We still don't know what the answer is to closing the achievement gap. I don't. So anyways, that's why, in answer to you, Commissioner Harrington, that's why I think that these two are something that we have a shorter view on correcting. And there's certainly an immediate need to get these things going in the right direction. Commissioner, Superintendent?
This is just information for the board, but the board has set a executive limitation policy for the superintendent 1.1, reducing disparities, which specifically addresses the difference in academic achievement, which is the achievement gap. So you've already set a policy around that, which will maintain. So be a lot less work for me if you want to just wrap it up. But okay. Well, then.
Commissioner Barlow, do you have a question? No, okay. Any further discussion on the FY19 goals? Can I have a motion?
I do one more question.
Oh, my gosh.
The
does this, she
adjective
waits.
on the first goal is significant. significant progress, and the adjective on the second goal is measurable progress, and presumably at the point of decision about whether it's 100% of the performance pay or a third of the, or whatever, of
Yeah, you
the
know
future
what?
board, but I don't understand why we're,
No, yeah, I agree,
I
because
would
in
go with
both cases.
significant in both
Fiscal year
places.
18, in both places, we're asking them to develop a mechanism for measuring progress. So I think we should use the same term, measurable, in number one, demonstrate measurable progress.
What would we do without you?
But what's the baseline for number one?
I think significant. If we're talking
We don't
about
know. It's-
a
he's gonna be
potential
developing it for
additional
fiscal
pay,
year.
I think
He hasn't developed the
significant
plan
is a
yet.
better thing to.
Significant measurable progress in
Yes.
both
Yeah.
instances. How's that?
Well,
Significant,
so,
measurable?
because I'm a data person, I would just say that I intentionally didn't include measurable in fiscal year 18 because we don't have a baseline.
No,
So
they're not
the
in, they're not
measuring-
in 18.
Oh, sorry.
It's just mechanism.
In 18?
Mechanism for measuring progress. Both 18s are just
Oh, so
mechanism.
18 sets the baseline?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thanks, sorry.
So in 19,
I
we'll do
was reading over your
significant
shoulder.
measurable progress.
The wrong thing, uh-huh.
So I got a problem with that. Because that's going to be our determination of whether or not it is significant.
Right.
Right? So if the bonus pay is $1, and no matter what it is, the board determines that this is not what we had hoped for, and we give them 10 cents out of the dollar, right? So we decide the significance, not him. He determines the measurable, and then we say, yea or nay, is that significant? So that's why I don't agree with putting the significant part in there.
But to me, the significant implies causality, right? Like there is a measurable progress could be made by accident, with no in a fluctuation of the student population, or I mean it to me it would almost entitle the superintendent to performance pay if there's an increase in the measurement by 0.1%. And to me, that's not the intent of the language. I mean, it statistically significant is I'm not a data person, but is a thing, right? Outside of some sort of range of what's I can't.
Probability.
Yes, thank you. Margin of error in a polling sense. So to me, that's what I'm thinking of, like.
Statistically significant.
Yes, but
change.
yeah.
Got it.
As opposed to just change where we can't sort of pinpoint the cause of it. So I would be in the significant camp.
And we are going to hear from the economist. Thank you very much. Dig in there.
Well, I just think that there are times that precision evades us. And that by saying significant, what we mean is that we really want to see meaningful progress, and that the board at that time will look at the information. The progress could be in developing a robust network. It could be developing a pipeline of student teachers from various universities, right? So significant can be many different things, not just changing the proportion of teachers of color. And as I said, you lose if you're too specific. And I think you just have to trust people to, in good faith, be able to evaluate the given evidence for significance. I mean, it's the same thing with the climate survey. Like, well, do we want a 5% improvement in satisfaction, or 7, or significant? And the superintendent will have his opportunity to define what significant means, and we will have an opportunity to evaluate what we mean by that. But I just, in my experience with these things, being too specific is hamstringing you.
I mean, I actually don't disagree with anything Commissioners Seguino and McLaren just said. I simply, and actually, I think my new proposal would be that we replace significant and measurable with meaningful, for all the reasons Stephanie, Commissioner Seguino just said. I think if we use different adjectives in these two goals, it suggests we mean two different things, and I don't think we do. The language in the 18 goals about the plans needing to be robust with a plan for measuring suggests an interest in actual achievement and action and stuff happening. And the language of the contract where the performance pay is up to X suggests the board is going to be making a qualitative decision that could get into these nuances. I just think we should have the same framing of the adjective. So I like meaningful.
Commissioner Seguino.
If other people are comfortable with that, I think meaningful might be a better,
Straw poll, everybody in favor of meaningful instead of significant measurable? Any further discussion needed? And he's even saying aye.
Overwhelmed
Yeah,
with the
there you
guy,
go.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and change that to, because in fiscal year 18, he's gonna make them measurable. That's how
Yeah.
they're gonna be reported anyways. So we're gonna say meaningful, and that's a determination by the board. In both cases, I'm gonna say meaningful. Any further discussion before we go to a motion?
This isn't exactly discussion of the
This-
motion, but.
So,
Well, okay. Can I make a comment after the vote?
you can make a comment at the vote, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Can I have a motion? Commissioner Kleeman, can I have a second? Commissioner Judson? I'll read these one more time so everybody understands them. Demonstrate meaningful progress towards implementing the employment diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring plan outlined in fiscal year 18. Demonstrate meaningful progress on improving district climate based on the plan you developed in fiscal year 18. Okay? All those in favor of the fiscal year 19 goals as stated, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those against? 2, thank you. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
For the first ones, too. This is the whole reason it was not for.
Oh, I didn't see, I'm sorry. All right, so 8-2 on, 8-2 on fiscal year 19. You said yay on fiscal year 18, right?
No, on the 19, on the principle I discussed.
Right, I got the 8-2, right, so, all right, so we had 9-1 on 18. All right, thank you. One last statement, then we gotta move on.
Oh, we should just make a reminder to ask ourselves whether there's budget. We should make a reminder to ask ourselves if there's budget implications of this the next time we come back to our budget conversation.
All right, so we have moved right through these things. So I'd like to make a motion to consider executive session to discuss a personnel matter, that being that of the superintendent's evaluation. All those in favor of entering executive session, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those against? Seeing none, we will now move into
Who
executive
was
session.
the second?
Ann,
For moving into,
yeah, you were the first and you were the second, right?
for moving into the second, no, but you can put me down.
I did the first.
Mark
I made the
first
motion.
and Judson.
All right, we going down the room?